Hey guys, tonight we're dropping you, quite unceremoniously, into a time when the walls are made of wattle and daub, the roof leaks in 4 places, and your bed is just a sack of straw that smells faintly of goat. Welcome to the Middle Ages. You're not a lord or lady. You're not even a scribe. You're just you. A perfectly average human dropped into a very unaverage time. The floor is dirt, not like wow earthy minimalist vibes, but literal earth. Cold, damp, trodden by generations of muddy boots and the occasional chicken. You wake up to the sound of someone hawking a lung outside, a rooster doing its best dramatic monologue, and a toddler somewhere having a very loud crisis involving a turnip. You stretch. Instantly regret it. Every muscle is stiff. Not because you did anything strenuous, but because this era doesn't believe in lumbar support, or mattresses, or the concept of rest, really. And as you sit up, a clump of straw stays glued to your hair. You're beginning to suspect the bed is also a nest. Now, you probably won't survive this. Not the sword fights or the dragons. They're more 12th century marketing than reality. No. You'll be taken out by the water, or the food, or the deep existential confusion over which spoon is for what. Spoiler, there are no spoons. That's for rich folks. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're cozy already, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Drop it in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first task, go outside. Which sounds easy, until you realize you're still in your linen shift, and the temperature outside is somewhere between moss-friendly and bones crack-on contact. There's no insulation in your house, no glass in the windows, just a wooden shutter you forgot to close, now flapping in the wind like it's mocking you. You shuffle to the door, step into your boots, which feel suspiciously damp, and breathe in the fine aroma of wet hay, smoke, and someone boiling cabbage far too early in the morning. It's barely dawn, but the village is already alive. Chickens scatter underfoot. Someone is shouting about a missing pig. There's a small communal water barrel outside your door, but it's frozen over. Again. So instead, you trudge toward the stream with a wooden bucket. The mud is ankle deep, and it's still clinging to yesterday's manure. Welcome to medieval multitasking. A walk, a chore, and a tetanus risk. Historians still argue whether medieval mornings were truly harsher than our own, or if it just feels worse without caffeine. But what they agree on: people woke early. Sunrise was your alarm clock. If you missed it, you missed everything. Mass, market, your one chance at the slightly less rock-hard bread. You dip the bucket into the stream. It's icy. Your hands are numb within seconds. As you lift it, your foot slips and, yep, you're wet now. And muddy, and cold, and absolutely done with this timeline. Back at your cottage, your housemate, possibly a spouse, possibly an unrelated person just staying for the winter, has started a fire in the hearth using damp logs and divine intervention. The smoke isn't going up the chimney. It's hanging around like a moody ghost. Your eyes water. Your nose burns. The cat, smug and ancient, watches from the rafters. Breakfast is bread. Coarse, chewy, made with flour that might include bits of ground-up fava beans or even, allegedly, sawdust. Because stretching grain is a medieval sport. You chew, and chew, and chew. The flavor is something between earthy and why is this spicy? Probably mold. Mainstream historians note that medieval diets were surprisingly hearty, for those who could afford variety. But for most, it's bread, ale, maybe some dried peas, and the occasional suspicious egg. Your stomach makes a noise you hope is just confusion, Your shirt is made of undyed wool. It itches like betrayal. You tie it closed with a belt that doubles as a tool holster, then fumble with your hose, aka wool leggings that absolutely do not match. They bag around your knees and sag in ways that make walking an emotional experience. You step outside again, now fully dressed and slightly less freezing. A neighbor waves, or possibly sneezes aggressively. Either way, you nod politely and try not to breathe in the smoke from their dung fire. Everyone's using what they've got, and what they've got is livestock. You start to understand why people in paintings always look vaguely annoyed, and yet, somehow, there's rhythm. A shared sense of misery that's oddly comforting. Someone hands you a turnip. No explanation. Just a turnip. You accept it like this is normal. It is. A fringe detail not often taught. In some villages, people would hang herbs like rosemary or mugwort by the door to keep away spirits, bad smells, or nosy neighbors. You consider stealing your neighbors, not for the magic, just because their house smells better than yours. As the morning continues, your head begins to throb slightly, either from smoke inhalation or lack of breakfast protein. You sit on a stool outside, clutch your questionable bread, and watch the world stir around you. A woman chases a goose. A boy sings a song that's probably about ale. The church bell rings, calling you to mass. You sigh. It's going to be a long day. And you've only been awake for 20 minutes. You try to stall. Maybe mass won't notice if you show up a bit late. But in a village like this, absence is basically a public declaration of heresy, and possibly witchcraft. So you go. Because even though your knees hurt, your bread's still chewing itself in your mouth, and you're 90% sure the goose from earlier holds a grudge, skipping mass is how you end up as the center of unwanted attention. The church is small, stone, and somehow colder inside than it is outside. You sit on a backless bench, because pews with comfort are reserved for the local lord or the patron with the most goats. The air smells like beeswax and faint mildew. You can't see much, since the windows are tiny and glass is a luxury, but there's light enough to see the priest, who is already mid-sermon. You catch the tail end of something about judgment, fire, and probably sin, though it's all in Latin. You nod solemnly. Everyone does. No one understands it, except maybe the priest, and even that's debatable. Mainstream historians agree that mass attendance was central to medieval life, socially, religiously, and politically. It wasn't just about belief, it was about being seen. In some places, your attendance was literally recorded. In others, villagers would snitch on you for skipping. Because why suffer alone? After the service, you exit into the sunlight, blinking like you've just emerged from a cave. You squint at the market square, which is less bustling bazaar and more slightly damp gathering of people selling suspicious things from wooden carts. You spot a man selling eel pies. Eel in a pie. You pretend not to make eye contact. Someone else is hawking dried apples, which look safer. You buy one with the one coin you've got, which might have been minted under a king nobody remembers. You chew. It's better than the bread. Slightly. Then the day hits you. You need water. But the stream is busy. Someone's washing linens upstream. And you're not convinced they understand the concept of soap. You decide to wait. While you do, you hear yelling from behind the baker's hut. Two people are arguing over who stole whose piglet. You stay out of it. You don't want to get accused of sorcery again just because you said the piglet looks like Jeff from 3 houses down. And speaking of accusations, you realize it's laundry day, which, in this century, means heating water over a fire, scrubbing cloth with ash soap or lye, and hoping you don't lose skin in the process. You offer to help your neighbor, mostly to get access to warm water. The neighbor accepts, hands you a shirt stained with something you don't want to identify, and points to the cauldron. You stir, you scrub, you try not to gag. Fringe tidbit here. Some folks believe that washing clothes on certain days, especially Fridays, invited bad luck. Others thought it was the only way to prevent demons from nesting in your garments. Historians still argue whether laundry was more a spiritual exercise or a public health strategy. Either way, it was exhausting. Your hands are raw, your back is sore, and you've only washed one tunic. You wander off to find food, real food. But you have to be careful. Eating from the wrong person's cart might get you sick, or worse, involved in their family drama. You settle on a barley pottage being stirred in a massive cauldron. It smells like onions, oats, and desperation. You pay with a bit of wool cloth. That's right. Barter economy, baby. You sit on a log, eat slowly, and watch the world blur by. There's a man preaching near the well, warning everyone that dancing will summon the devil. You're not even planning to dance, but now you're tempted out of spite. A woman brushes past you holding a basket of dried herbs. She mutters something in Old English, or possibly just a very aggressive whisper. The air smells like thyme, and maybe something more medicinal. She gives you a look. You decide not to ask. Somewhere down the path, a bell rings. Not the church bell. This is the watch out bell. Someone's been caught stealing, or gossiping, or letting their pig poop near the well. You follow the crowd. You're curious. You also want to stand near other warm bodies. At the center of the village, the reeve is lecturing a teenage boy who allegedly tried to pass off a painted rock as a coin. You respect the creativity. The punishment is mostly public embarrassment, being tied to a post while people throw stale rolls at him. You still have your breakfast bread. It's basically a brick. You abstain. Midday drifts toward afternoon, and you realize you need to use the latrine. This is not a graceful moment. You find a small, half-walled hut behind the alehouse. It smells exactly as you expect. There's a plank with a hole. There is no privacy, no toilet paper, just a pile of moss, and the vague hope that no one walks past while you're mid-squat. You emerge changed. Not emotionally, but in the sense that you now understand the true meaning of humility. Back in the square, someone hands you a cup of ale. Not out of kindness, it's just safer than water. You sip. It's warm, flat, and tastes like fermented rainwater. But it's mildly comforting. You find a shaded spot beneath a tree and sit. Around you the town hums. Faint music, distant chatter, a blacksmith hammering something in rhythmic clanks. You rest your eyes for a moment, and immediately jolt awake because someone's dog is licking your foot. You've survived the morning. Barely. Your feet hurt, your belly's uncertain, and you're pretty sure your eyebrows now smell like firewood. It's not even evening yet. Your legs are stiff. Your back feels like it's been used as a chopping block. But the day keeps plodding forward, and so do you. You remember there's firewood to gather before nightfall. Otherwise, your home will be a chilly, damp echo chamber that smells like regret. So you head toward the edge of the village, past the thatched cottages and the sagging fence that doesn't really keep anything in or out. A few chickens squint at you with judgmental, beady eyes. One has a limp and what looks like a vendetta. The path to the woods is muddy and root-knotted. Every few steps, your foot sinks into what you hope is just mud. You reach the tree line, eyes darting for dry branches. Not green wood, not brittle twigs, but something in between. There's no convenient pile waiting for you, of course. You gather what you can. Crooked limbs, snapped boughs, a stick that smells faintly of mushrooms and disappointment. Mainstream historians agree that gathering fuel was a constant concern for medieval households, especially in winter months. Charcoal, peat, dried dung, whatever burned was fair game. The struggle wasn't just about warmth, but also about food prep, boiling water, and yes, staving off the rats. Your arms full of uneven firewood, you turn back and nearly trip over a sleeping beggar curled in a patch of thistles. You murmur an apology. He doesn't wake. You hope it's because he's sleeping. You keep walking. Back in the village, smoke curls from chimneys like lazy ghosts. The smell of turnip stew wafts from someone's home. Your stomach churns again. But you're not sure if it's hunger or residual barley pottage. You pass the alehouse and consider stepping inside. Not for a drink, though that would be nice, but for warmth, a stool, maybe a glimpse at local gossip. Inside, it's dim, musky, and somehow loud, even when no one's talking. A minstrel is tuning a badly strung lute in the corner. Two men are arm wrestling over what looks like a stale meat pie. You hover near the hearth, letting your knees thaw while pretending not to eavesdrop. One woman is telling a story about her cousin's cousin, who saw Saint Bridget appear in a loaf of bread. Someone else swears a fox whispered Latin to them during a fever. Everyone nods like this is normal. You nod too. Fringe beliefs like these weren't entirely outlandish in context. Dreams, visions, and odd encounters were part of the daily texture of life. Historians still argue whether these stories were acts of faith, symptoms of malnutrition, or just very creative explanations for boredom. Either way, it's great entertainment. A child scampers past, chasing something invisible. Possibly a spirit, possibly just the wind. Someone offers you a half mug of ale and a plate with, well, it might have once been cheese. You accept with a smile that says thank you, and a stomach that says please reconsider. You sit near the wall, watching shadows flicker on the beams. Time slows in taverns. There's no clock, only the tilt of the sun and the length of the shadows. You've barely been there 15 minutes when the reeve pokes his head in, calls for someone named Alric, and leaves. No one moves. You assume Alric owes someone money. Eventually you stand, brush crumbs from your tunic and leave. The sun is sinking, turning everything a soft gold. It would be beautiful if you weren't thinking about lice, or blisters, or the fact that you haven't sat on anything soft since breakfast, and even that was debatable. You pass a group of older villagers weaving rushes into mats. They invite you to join, not because they want your help, but because stories are currency, and you still owe them for that time you spilled milk in the communal oven. You sit, awkwardly cross-legged, and listen as one woman describes her daughter's dream involving a horse, a bishop, and a suspiciously large cucumber. The mats smell like river reeds and effort. Your fingers fumble through the pattern. A man beside you starts whistling a tune that feels older than the hills. You hum along before realizing it's the melody the church bell plays during funerals. You stop humming. Eventually you rise, bow slightly, and make your way home. Your cottage is leaning just a little more than usual. You nudge the door open with your shoulder. It sticks in the damp. Inside, it's dim, but at least dry. You stack the firewood near the hearth, light a small bundle of kindling, and coax it into a hesitant flame. The room fills with warmth, smoke, and the faint scent of old onions. There's no privacy in here. Not really, just a curtain on a string to divide the sleeping straw from the kitchen bench. A mouse runs across the rafters. You pretend not to notice. Dinner is reheated pottage. You eat slowly, chewing each bite like it might betray you. Then, a soft knock. It's your neighbor. Her child has a fever. She asks for help. You go. You don't have medicine, but you know how to heat water. You dampen cloths. You hold a little hand that's too warm and too small. You whisper stories about frogs and kings, even though you're too tired to remember how they end. You stay until the child sleeps, and then quietly leave. Outside, the stars are beginning to show. The air smells like cold earth and chimney soot. You hear a nightjar call once, then silence. You walk home slowly, your breath steaming like ghost whispers in the dark. And you think, it's only been one day. One long, relentless, back-aching, mildly suspicious day. And somehow, you've made it to evening, almost. You duck back into your cottage and shut the door behind you with a gentle shove. The latch doesn't catch the first time. It rarely does. So you give it a polite thump with your palm and listen for the familiar clunk that means, for now, you're safe from wandering goats, neighbors, or that one chicken with bloodlust in her eyes. The fire has slouched into embers, not out, not roaring, just sulking. You toss a few splinters on, then one larger log, whispering encouragements like you're raising a small, moody child. In the corner, your bed awaits. Bed might be generous. It's a lumpy pallet of straw, covered with a sackcloth sheet, tucked beside the hearth for warmth and hopefully to deter the rats from getting ideas. It smells faintly of thyme, which is either the herbs you stuffed in there last week or the fact that your cat had a strong opinion about dinner. You sit on the edge, rubbing your sore feet. The day has taken its toll. Your ankles click like old door hinges. You wiggle your toes and wonder if the damp has gotten into your bones. Probably. Everything else has. Removing your outer layer of clothing feels like peeling a second itchy skin. The wool is rough, even after a season of wear. You lay it carefully near the fire, close enough to dry, far enough not to ignite. You've made that mistake once, and you still hear about it during feast days. Sleeping attire in the Middle Ages wasn't exactly tailored. Most folks slept in their chemise, or simply in the buff, depending on the season, the mood, or how many people were in the room. Shared beds were normal, especially in households with apprentices, guests, or large families. Privacy wasn't a given, it was a luxury. And tonight, you have the bed to yourself. Except, of course, for the cat, who's already claimed the warmest corner. You crawl under the blanket, a threadbare quilt that's more suggestion than insulation, and nestle into the straw. It crackles and pokes at you like it's reminding you who's boss. You sigh, adjusting your limbs into the least uncomfortable position. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, or coughs, or possibly recites a hymn. It's hard to tell at this point. The night air carries a dozen strange sounds. A shutter creaking, something rustling in the thatch, the wind humming through the trees. It's not silence. It's medieval silence. Alive, textured, and ever so slightly menacing. Your stomach grumbles. Again. You should be used to it by now. Most peasants weren't eating 3 square meals, or even square meals. Gruel, root vegetables, occasional dairy, and bread if the harvest was kind. And if it wasn't, we're talking boiled weeds and prayers. Historians still argue whether hunger shaped medieval piety, or if piety just made hunger feel more poetic. The fire flickers gently. Shadows dance on the walls, turning beams into archways and baskets into crouched creatures. You stare at the ceiling and notice a new cobweb, a little silver thread glinting in the low light. You name the spider George and wish him well. Just as you are about to drift off, you hear a knock. Not the sharp kind, more like a polite tap-tap of someone who knows they're interrupting and feels bad about it. You groan softly and rise. At the door is your cousin. He needs to borrow a blanket. Again. You hand over your spare without a word. He looks sheepish. You say nothing because if you open your mouth, it'll be sarcasm, and you're too tired for social consequences. Back in bed. Again. The cat has shifted exactly 1 inch into the space you vacated. You nudge her gently and reclaim your corner. She glares but accepts the compromise. You close your eyes and let your mind wander. You think of tomorrow. The market. The thatch that needs patching. The cloak that still hasn't mended itself. The neighbor who swears their pig is a reincarnated friar. You think of yesterday, the time you slipped in the mud and pretended it was a dance move. The look the baker gave you when you asked if that loaf was fresh or just medieval fresh. Your thoughts drift further, into stories you heard as a child. Tales of saints, dragons, and talking wells. Of cows that gave beer and hens that predicted the weather. Some say those were just bedtime stories. Others say they were warnings. Still others say the beer cow was real and lived 3 towns over. The room is warmer now. The fire has rallied slightly. The cat purrs softly. Your limbs grow heavy, your breath slower. You think of the stars outside, of the moonlight filtering through the shutter slats, painting faint silver lines on the wall, like the beginnings of a map. And somewhere between the straw and the shadows, you realize you've made it. It's the middle of the night. You've survived hunger, discomfort, nosy neighbors, judgmental livestock, and at least one spiritual crisis in the alehouse. You're still here. You wake to a rooster crowing with what can only be described as excessive confidence. It's still dark, the kind of dark where every shape is a guess, and every creak sounds like it might be an omen. Your neck aches from the awkward angle your head found in the straw, and your right leg is asleep, probably due to the cat coiled on it like a furry sentry. You don't rise immediately. No one does. For a few breaths, you just lie there in the quiet moment between night and day, letting the aches register one at a time. Your back joins the protest next, then your left shoulder, then your dignity, which seems to have slipped between the floorboards sometime last week. Eventually you stretch, a long, slow pull of your limbs that makes you feel like an unstuck marionette. Something in your spine cracks. That's either a good sign or the start of something biblical. You'll find out by lunch. Breakfast, if you're lucky, is a slice of yesterday's bread. Emphasis on yesterday. It's gone from soft to something closer to building material, but you dunk it in a little weak ale and call it rustic. Most peasants drank low-alcohol ale or cider with meals, safer than the water, which had opinions of its own. You pull on your clothes again. They're still slightly damp. Naturally. The hearth fire has gone out overnight, despite your best efforts. You mutter something unkind to the log that betrayed you, then shuffle toward the door. Outside, the village is beginning to stir. Smoke curls from chimneys. A dog trots past with purpose. A child chases a chicken. The chicken appears to be winning. Your first task is to fetch water from the well. You grab the bucket, wooden, bound with iron, heavier than your hopes, and begin the walk. It's cold. The kind of cold that bites fingers and seeps into places you didn't know could shiver. You keep moving. At the well, you nod to the neighbor ahead of you. She's already filled 2 buckets and is muttering to herself about how her daughter keeps giving their best turnips to a boy who plays the flute badly. You offer no advice. You've lived here long enough to know flute boys are a seasonal hazard. You lower the bucket. It groans on the rope, the pulley squeaks, the well breathes cold mist into your face. When it finally comes back up, sloshing and heavy, you realize your sleeve is soaked. Again. You do not scream. You are stronger than this. Back home, you start your chores. Today it's tending the garden and checking the chickens for signs of demonic possession. One stares at you too long. You mark her for observation. There's also patching the roof and fixing the fence and figuring out where that draft is coming from. By midday, your hands are raw, your knees muddy, and your temper frayed. But you pause for a meal. Something warm, if you're lucky. Maybe pottage. A kind of vegetable stew that changes flavor depending on what's in season, what's left, and how optimistic you're feeling. While you eat, you overhear someone at the edge of the road telling a tale. Something about a knight who got lost in the woods and ended up marrying a tree. You nod politely. It's not the strangest story you've heard this week. In the afternoon, a traveler passes through. You trade a turnip for a bit of news. He tells you about a village where people are dyeing their clothes with beetroot now. Very fashionable. He also mentions a monastery where the monks play music every sunrise. You wonder what sunrise music sounds like when half the monks have head colds. Evening approaches. You milk the goat. She resents it. You apologize. She does not forgive you. You light the fire again. This time, it catches on the second try. A minor miracle. You warm your hands, stretch your legs, and let the rhythm of the day settle into your bones. Later, someone knocks. A neighbor with a broken shoe. You mend it while sipping broth. They talk about their cousin who once saw a ghost in the shape of a duck. You don't ask for details. Some mysteries are better that way. Night falls. You lie in bed once more. The cat back on her throne. The fire flickering low. You've survived a full 24 hours in the Middle Ages. Your clothes are itchy. Your muscles are sore. And you've inhaled more smoke than a chimney sweep. But you've also heard strange stories. Shared a meal. Fixed a shoe. And watched stars appear between thatched roofs. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't comfortable. But it was real. And surprisingly, grounding. And now, as promised, we slow down. You let the final sounds of the day melt into quiet. The fire sighs. The wind outside has softened. The cat purrs with a kind of knowing hush. Let your breath ease. Let the straw beneath you shift into something gentler. You've walked a long, crooked, creaky day in someone else's boots. You've ducked low beams, braved cold wells, and even survived the stare of that one haunted chicken. The moon slips higher, the air cools, the village sleeps. You are still. The last candle flickers out, and the room fades to shadow. Nothing else is needed. Just you. Quiet, stillness, and sleep. And so, the world turns quietly, and another curious corner of history waits to be explored. We slip back to a time when your alarm clock was a rooster, your bath was seasonal, and your co-workers were thousands of winged stingers humming ominously from a straw hive. You're not a knight, or a noble, or even a village gossip with great teeth. No, you're a medieval beekeeper, tucked away in a damp corner of Europe, where your job is quiet, sticky, and just dangerous enough to keep you humble. The early morning fog clings low to the ground as you pull on a coarse linen tunic, already stiff from yesterday's smoke and sweat. There's a sweet, slightly sour scent in the air, old wax, and the faint tang of fermented honeycomb. Your tools are simple. A smoker made from leather and clay, a crooked knife, and a calm hand. You'll need that calm, because your hive doesn't care about your lack of caffeine. They will sting you just the same. You trudge through the dewy grass to the apiary, a proud word for your row of clunky woven skeps. Each skep is basically a giant upside-down basket, sitting on a flat stone like a fat straw mushroom. The bees, oblivious to your hopes and dreams, are already out working the morning blooms. You envy their focus. There's no veil, no gloves. If you're lucky, you've rubbed your skin with crushed lemon balm or thyme, herbs thought to calm the bees. If you're unlucky, well, you probably just woke up covered in hives again. Superstition is part of your toolkit too. Some beekeepers whisper prayers before opening the hive. Others knock 3 times and wait, as if asking the bees politely to cooperate. Because in this world, the bees are more than insects. They're messengers of God, bringers of sweetness, and occasional omens of doom. You light your smoker, careful not to choke yourself in the process. The smoke dulls the bees' senses, keeping them docile. Supposedly. Historians still argue whether the typical medieval beekeeper actually knew what smoke did to the bees, or just noticed it made things less stingy. You waft the smoke gently across the hive entrance. The bees respond like hungover guests at a bonfire party, agitated, but too dazed to really complain. Lifting the skep is heavy work. There's no frame, no inspection tray, just comb after comb, fused in a chaotic spiral of golden wax. You inspect by feel, smell, and sound. A strong hive hums with a low, rhythmic buzz. A failing one, quiet, listless, sometimes damp with mold. You tap gently, listening. If the bees answer, you breathe easier. If they don't, you prepare for a grim cleanup. Not all your neighbors understand what you do. Some think beekeepers are a little odd, too solitary, too close to nature. In some villages, bees are believed to carry souls or to hear secrets. If a beekeeper dies, their hives must be told, or the bees might abandon the family altogether. So yes, one of your actual chores is walking up to each hive and announcing your cousin's death, loudly. You might be poor, but your bees make you useful. Even the lord of the manor wants your honey. It sweetens his food, preserves his fruit, and makes his mead less awful. He doesn't visit your hives himself, of course. That would require boots. He sends his steward instead, who always stands too close, flinches at every buzz, and smells like dried lavender and fear. Your best honey comes from wildflowers, borage, clover, and heather if you're lucky. The bees know their way better than you do. They'll fly for miles, dodging birds, smoke, and maybe the occasional bored peasant with a stick. There's something calming about watching them return. Fat with pollen, legs dusted yellow, like tiny furry baristas with deadlines. But it's not all sweet simplicity. You face constant threats. Bad weather, the flowers vanish. Bad neighbors, they might rob your hive. Bad year, your colony could collapse without warning. And heaven forbid your queen dies. Replacing her is a delicate task, one that may or may not involve muttered Latin and a borrowed candle from the church. Some say a hive without a queen grows restless and angry, like a bar fight waiting to happen. Others believe a new queen is chosen through divine instinct, or perhaps pure bee drama. One quirky record from 13th century Flanders tells of a beekeeper who claimed to have trained his bees to recognize his voice and follow him like a pet dog. No one else could get near the hive without a full-on bee rebellion. You try humming while you work, just in case. You pause to scrape propolis from the hive's edges. It's sticky, brown, and weirdly fragrant, like pine sap and old shoes. You don't waste it though. Apothecaries pay for this stuff. They mix it into salves for wounds, chew it for sore gums, even mash it into medieval chewing gum. Your fingers are perpetually sticky. You've stopped trying to fix that. A drop of honey lands on your sleeve. You instinctively lick it. It tastes like summer and smoke, complex, floral, and just a little wild. You know the queen is somewhere deep inside, laying hundreds of eggs a day like some sort of buzzing fertility goddess. You'll never see her, but you'll feel her presence in the rhythm of the hive. By mid-morning, you're tired, stung at least once, and only halfway through. You sip water from a clay flask and glance at the clouds, hoping the rain holds off. Your dog snoozes in the grass nearby, his tail twitching at every buzz. He's smart enough to stay out of range, which is more than you can say for most humans. The world of beekeeping is small, sticky, and slow, but it's also powerful. You shape sweetness from chaos. You take something wild and make it into gold. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. The thing about bees, besides their casual interest in your face, is that their society is disturbingly well organized. As a medieval beekeeper, you start to notice that your insects have a clearer sense of purpose than the entire local council. Deep inside the skep, away from your meddling, a rigid hierarchy buzzes with order. At the top, of course, is the queen. She's not regal in the fairy tale sense, more like an exhausted, overworked egg-laying machine. Her life is long by insect standards, and her days consist of laying up to 2,000 eggs when the hive is thriving. The other bees? They serve her with fanatical devotion. You might wonder what that's like. Then again, you already serve a lord who taxes your honey, so maybe it's not that different. The worker bees, all female, do everything. Forage, build, clean, nurse, guard. If bees could roll their eyes, the workers probably would every time someone mentions the drones. Ah yes, the drones. Male bees. They have one job, and once they do it, they die. If they don't do it, they get kicked out of the hive anyway. Historians still argue whether medieval beekeepers truly understood this biological setup or just saw drones as lazy freeloaders, which, to be fair, they kind of are. You notice the shifts in your hive's rhythm. Early in the year, it's all bustle and growth. In summer, they swarm if you're not careful, sending a cluster of bees off to start a new hive, often in your neighbor's barn, because of course. Swarming is exciting, chaotic, and slightly terrifying. To stop it, some beekeepers mutilate the queen's wings, a practice that today seems cruel. But in your world, it's considered practical, like trimming hedges or yelling at your ox. Even in your rough medieval world, people can't help but admire the bees' sense of order. Monks especially love them. In the cloister gardens, bees are practically monastic creatures themselves. Disciplined, productive, celibate, sort of, and deeply committed to their communal work. Some abbots even write little sermons using bee behavior as a metaphor for piety. You once overheard a monk compare bees to a well-run monastery. The queen is like the abbot, the workers the brothers, and the drones. Well, perhaps best not to discuss the drones. The joke landed. Barely. Monks aren't known for their zingers, but bees aren't all harmony and cooperation. Inside the hive, the struggle is real. A queen only rises to power after fighting off or eliminating rivals. Yes, bee royalty is less royal ball and more Highlander deathmatch. Only one can rule, and the rest? Executed by the workers or left to starve. Brutal, efficient, and somehow still more civil than your village's last grain tax dispute. You start noticing little parallels between their world and yours. The hive guards the queen, like a lord protects his lineage. Worker bees sacrifice themselves for the group, just like soldiers or desperate millers defending their grain stores. There's even a kind of justice. Bees that slack off or act erratically are ignored or removed. You're not sure whether to be impressed or unnerved. And then there's the brood nest, the warm center of the hive where the queen lays her eggs. You can't see it directly in your skep, but you sense its hum. It's alive with larvae, curled like tiny question marks in waxy cells. The workers feed them a slurry called bee bread, fermented pollen and nectar. The really lucky larvae get royal jelly, a protein-rich substance that turns a regular larva into a queen. You once joked that you wish someone fed you royal jelly. The village healer offered you goose liver instead. Not quite the same. One particularly rainy afternoon, you visit another beekeeper across the river. A grizzled old woman with a scowl and the best honey for miles. She keeps her bees in log hives, hollow trunks stood upright. Her hives are taller than yours, darker, and utterly silent when she opens them. You ask how she manages. She shrugs and says, "They respect me." You believe her. She's missing 2 fingers and wears a necklace of tiny carved bees. She tells you about an old belief, that bees came from paradise, gifted to Adam after the fall to remind mankind of sweetness and order. "They're not insects," she says, eyes glinting. "They're sermons with wings." That night, you dream of bees forming Latin letters in the air, spelling out prophecies you can't quite read. You wake up with your face in a wax tray. Even your lord, who never lifts anything heavier than a goblet, has started asking questions about your bees. Not out of curiosity. He suspects your hive is more productive than the manor zone. You try to act vague. You don't want anyone else managing your hive. You've seen what happens when some apprentice gets overconfident and pokes the wrong cell with a stick. Panic, screaming, a helmet full of bees. It's not all admiration, though. Some villagers mutter that your bees sting only the unjust. You're not sure how that rumor started, but it does make people think twice before insulting your boots. Other times, bees are blamed for curses, bad harvests, even miscarriages. You know it's nonsense, but you also keep an extra sprig of St. John's wort tied to your hive for good measure. Can't hurt. By midsummer, your hive population peaks. The sound near the skeps is constant, a vibrating drone like a lute string held too long. You sometimes sit nearby just to listen. The rhythm changes depending on the hour, the weather, even your mood. One afternoon, you swear the bees were humming in harmony with the chapel bells. Maybe you were just tired. Maybe not. You begin to appreciate the strangeness of their perfection. No one taught them their tasks. They just know. Each bee lives only a few weeks, but the hive lives on, like a single mind with thousands of limbs. It's a kind of immortality, a buzzing, golden, slightly terrifying immortality. And as you brush the wax shavings from your palms, you wonder, who's really in charge here? You keep the bees alive, sure, but maybe they're keeping you that way too. You're halfway through the season now, and the hum of your hives is joined by a more human kind of buzz. Trade. Honey, once just your sticky little secret, has become something much bigger. It's currency. It's power. It's also the reason you're suddenly more popular at market than the guy with the dancing goat. You've traded jars of honey for eggs, for bread, for a comb carved from bone. One time, someone gave you a single iron nail for a spoonful, claiming it was blessed by a bishop. You're still not sure what's holier, his story or your honey. At the weekly fair, your stall isn't much. Just a plank, balanced on barrels, but it glistens. Amber jars lined like stained glass windows, catching the sun and drawing in buyers like moths. The rich want it for pastries, the poor want it for energy, and the apothecaries want it for everything else. One merchant even asked if you could dye honey red. Why? So it looks more dangerous, he said, completely serious. And the mead makers? They love you. Mead is the drink of choice for those who can't afford wine but still want to feel poetic. Sweet, strong, and more than a little sticky, it's the drink of lovers and lords alike. You tried making your own once, but it exploded in your cupboard and soaked your boots. You leave that to the monks now. Speaking of monks, they're your biggest competition. Don't let the robes fool you. These guys are honey tycoons. Cloistered monasteries across Europe maintain massive apiaries, and they've got time, patience, and scriptural justification on their side. They even write bee poems. You read one once, it rhymed drone with throne, and then again with stone. Not their best work. Still, it's hard to compete. Monks have labor, literacy, and access to trade routes you could only dream of. They package their honey in neat, wax-sealed pots, each stamped with a little cross. Yours are corked with scrap linen and prayers. Guess which sells better in town? Historians still argue whether monastic dominance in the honey trade helped stabilize regional economies or simply cornered the market. You, on the other hand, just want enough coin to buy a new belt and maybe a second pair of socks. Dreams are modest when you're scraping wax from your fingernails. But trade brings danger too. You've heard stories of beehive theft. Yes, actual hive heists. One morning, a friend of yours woke up to find his best skep gone, dragged off in the night like a kidnapped child. The footprints led nowhere. Probably someone with a cart, he muttered, eyes sunken. Or the devil. Hard to say. To prevent this, you start sleeping closer to your hives. You build a little lean-to, just enough to shield you from the wind, and fall asleep listening to their humming. It's comforting in a weird way, like they're keeping guard. You wonder if they feel the same. Then there's the politics of it all. Lords start to notice who has bees and who doesn't. You're summoned one day to the manor. Summoned, mind you, not invited. The steward wants to know how much honey you'll be gifting to the Lord this year. As thanks for your protection, he says, eyeing your basket. You smile and nod, mentally subtracting jars from your winter stash. It's not theft if it's traditional, right? Still, not all your honey is taken. You keep a secret stash tucked in a hollow tree, just far enough from your hut to avoid curious neighbors, and close enough to reach in a storm. You call it the Queen's Share. It's for trade emergencies, bad harvests, and occasionally a spoonful on a warm oatcake when the world feels especially unfair. The bees keep producing, and you keep harvesting, carefully, methodically. You cut the comb, let it drip, strain it through coarse cloth. Your hands are always sticky. Your sleeves smell faintly of smoke and sweetness. You stop noticing after a while. Or rather, you come to like it. One day, a traveling noblewoman stops at your stall. She picks up a tiny jar, examines it, and says, "This tastes like clover." You nod, surprised. She continues, "In Byzantium, they serve honey with rose petals." You have no idea what Byzantium is, but you pretend you do and say, "That's a fine idea." She buys 3 jars and leaves. You later learn that her family owns half the valley. Later that week, a merchant offers to buy your entire season's supply up front. Tempting, but you decline. You don't trust him. Too many rings on his fingers. Too clean. Your bees wouldn't like him, and through it all, the bees remain the same, indifferent to your fortunes, faithful to their flowers. While you haggle, they forage. While you scheme, they build. You admire that. Sometimes, when you feel overwhelmed by the push and pull of village gossip and market pricing, you just sit beside the hive and listen. That's when you realize the hive doesn't care who profits. It just is. Productive, purposeful, and silent. Unless you mess with it. In which case, well, good luck. And though you wouldn't say it aloud, not in front of the Lord or the friar or even your own shadow, you begin to suspect the bees might be smarter than anyone you know. One last thought before nightfall. You've started writing little symbols in the wax, just to see if they stay. They don't mean anything. Or maybe they do. Maybe one day someone will find them, little curls and scratches in amber, and wonder what the beekeeper was trying to say. Maybe. This is mine. I made this. I survived. By late summer, when the air gets heavy and even the chickens seem sluggish, your honey takes on a darker color. Thicker, more caramel than gold. This batch is special. It's not just for eating anymore. It's medicine. It's magic. It's the stuff of whispered promises and quietly desperate prayers. You're not a physician, obviously. Most physicians wouldn't be caught dead talking to a beekeeper. But in your village, and many like it, you're the closest thing some folks have to an herbalist. You know what honey does to a burn. You've seen it calm a cough, seal a wound, and soften the last moments of someone's life. One time, the blacksmith's apprentice scorched his arm on an iron bar. The wound blistered, angry and swollen. You dabbed it with a honey and vinegar poultice wrapped in clean cloth and crossed your fingers. The next week, the swelling faded. The blacksmith called you a miracle worker. You didn't argue. The healers say honey draws out bad humors, which is medieval for gunk we don't understand. You mix it with garlic for infections, with mint for belly aches, with crushed poppy when sleep won't come. People trust you, or more accurately, they trust your bees, and not just for healing. Honey has a holy weight too. Some believe it was the first food tasted in Eden, and a few monks still drizzle it over communion bread when they're feeling bold. You once watched a priest anoint a dying man's lips with a drop. Not wine, not oil, honey. So he'll enter sweetness, the priest murmured. You never forgot that. Of course, where there's holiness, there's also weirdness. Bees and magic go way back. Everyone knows someone who swears bees understand Latin, or that they hum louder on feast days. You don't believe all of it, but after seeing a hive calm down when a child started singing, you're not so sure anymore. Historians still argue whether the connection between beekeeping and folk magic was widespread or mostly exaggerated in later accounts. But for you, it's real enough. You've seen villagers leave bread near your hives as offerings. You've watched a woman whisper secrets into the comb, hoping the bees would carry her grief away. No one teaches you these rituals. They just sort of show up. Like weeds or prophecy, you've heard tales of bee charms, tiny amulets made from wax and silver, hung above a cradle to keep away fevers. You've even made one yourself once, when your niece was born during a thunderstorm. It looked ridiculous, but she never got sick. So maybe it worked. Then there are the darker stories. You try not to listen, but they're everywhere. Bees swarming on a corpse before anyone knows the person is dead. A hive that refuses to settle on holy ground. Once, a girl downriver claimed her bees started producing blood-red honey after her mother cursed the fields. You never saw it, but even now, when your honey darkens, you think of her. One of your more eccentric neighbors insists bees can predict the weather. He watches them like most men watch the sky. If they fly low and lazy, rain is coming. If they vanish entirely, he says, pack your things. His predictions are accurate enough that you start paying attention. You catch yourself watching them before deciding when to cut hay or walk to market. Eventually, you realize they know the land better than any calendar ever will. Then comes a particularly hard week. One of your hives collapses, silent, still, eerily clean. No signs of disease or theft. Just empty. You bury the skep under a hawthorn tree, the traditional place for things we don't understand. Some say bees die of grief if their keeper neglects them. Others believe a spirit claimed them. You're not sure what you believe, but you whisper an apology anyway. The other hives survive, thank God. You double your visits, speak to them more, even when no one's around. It's not crazy if it works, right? Your reputation grows. People start requesting wax. Not just for candles, but for charms, for sealings, for love spells. You don't ask questions. You just shape the wax, hand it over, and accept a loaf of bread or a jar of salted butter in return. One strange old woman with hair like dry moss once asked you for a piece of comb untouched by blade or sun. You gave her one. The next day, her toothache vanished, or so she claimed. You didn't ask for proof. Some things are better left alone, of course. Not all uses are mysterious. Wax candles are pure gold to the church. Bright, long burning, and, most importantly, clean. Tallow stinks. Wax doesn't. So the wealthier the parish, the more wax it needs. You trade off your extra combs, shaping them into crude candles with wicks made from nettle thread. Not pretty, but functional. Some days, you think you've become more wax than person. Your hands are perpetually glossy. You smell faintly of honey even in your sleep. Bees crawl over you without stinging. Once, a child called you the bee witch. You didn't correct him. One stormy evening, you find yourself kneeling by a hive, whispering not a prayer, but something like it. Stay alive, you murmur. Stay warm. I'll bring sugar if the flowers fail. You don't know if they hear you, but when the rain slows and the humming returns, you smile. Because here's the truth. You depend on these bees far more than they depend on you. And as the days grow shorter and the light takes on that golden, tired hue, you begin to prepare. Not just for harvest or storage, but for something quieter. something deeper. The final stretch, because autumn is coming, and soon your bees will sleep. By the time the leaves crisp underfoot and the mornings bite your fingers, your bees are slowing. The frantic wing beats of spring and summer are gone, replaced by a steady, tired hum, like a fire burning low but steady in the hearth. You know that sound. It means it's time. The final harvest is a quiet one. No fanfare, no markets. Just you, your smoker, and the soft, sticky ghost of all the work you've done. The air smells sharper now, full of dry grass and wood smoke, with only a hint of sweetness left in the comb. You take just enough honey to get through the winter, no more. The rest, you leave to the hive. They'll need it more than you will. Some of your neighbors aren't so generous. You hear of hives stripped clean, bees left to starve, unless someone remembers to feed them sugar water from a cracked bowl. You think about offering advice, but you don't. Everyone thinks they know best, right up until their hive dies and they blame the weather. You don't tell them your real secret, you talk to your bees. It's a fading custom, one most people laugh at now, but you do it anyway. Every week, as the wind sharpens, you stop beside each hive and speak. Just a few words. Stay warm. You're not alone. Sometimes, if it's been a hard day, you tell them a story. You don't know if they understand, but you do it all the same. There's a quiet ritual you've adopted. Before the first frost, you bring a beeswax candle to the chapel and light it for them. You whisper thanks, not to any saint, but to the hive itself, for its order, its chaos, its warmth, for keeping you alive, because winter is not easy. Your hives are tucked in now, insulated with straw and burlap, propped with stones to keep out the wind. You've built a low wall of dried mud around the apiary, hoping it holds against the coming snow. Inside the skeps, the bees cluster together, surrounding their queen in a living ball of warmth. They vibrate their flight muscles, no flying, just trembling, generating heat that keeps the whole colony alive. It's a miracle, really, a quiet one. No fireworks, no divine voice, just thousands of tiny bodies choosing to survive together. Historians still argue whether medieval beekeepers truly understood what the bees did in winter. Most thought they hibernated or vanished, or turned into beetles. Some believed they went underground like bears. But you've sat through enough winters to know better. You've seen what's left behind when a hive fails. You've felt the silence. There's something almost sacred about that stillness. You pass the winter in fits. Some days are full of mending, clothes, boots, baskets. Other days are empty as the sky. You check your hives even when you don't need to, brushing away snow, tapping gently at the woven sides, listening, waiting. On the coldest nights, when the wind howls like it's looking for someone to blame, you find yourself reaching for a bit of honey, your own private store. A spoonful on the tongue, melting slow and thick. It tastes of sun, of summer, of long-forgotten blooms. It's a reminder that you made it through once, and that maybe, just maybe, you'll do it again. There's a phrase your grandmother used to say, back when you were small enough to think bees were fairies with fur. If you keep them alive, they'll keep you alive. You used to think she meant honey. Now, you're not so sure. Maybe it's the rhythm they give you. The reason to rise each day. The excuse to watch flowers a little longer than necessary. The way your thoughts quiet when you listen to their hum. Like a lullaby you never quite learned the words to. And when the year turns again, when the air softens and the first green shoots break through the mud, you'll be there, smoker in hand, eyes tired but hopeful. You'll open the hives, whisper a greeting, and pray that they've made it through. Because in the end, that's all you can do. pretend, hope, wait, and trust that something so small, so easily overlooked, might still carry you through the hardest season. Now that the shoelaces are tied and the rosewater has faded, there's another odd tale to unfold. We step into the perfumed haze of a Tudor kitchen. Smoke curling through wooden rafters, iron pots simmering over open flames, and that unmistakable aroma of roses. Roses in the stew. Roses in your bread. Roses on the roast peacock. You wrinkle your nose, but that's just how they liked it. Welcome to a world where rosewater wasn't just a garnish. It was a lifestyle. You might think you could handle a few dainty drops of floral water in your food. But spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Not the grease-slick floors, not the clouds of soot, and definitely not the heavily perfumed lamprey pie. You squint through the smoky haze, ducking as a kitchen boy rushes past with a pan of hissing fat. The room buzzes with clangs, voices, the occasional scream when someone drops a cleaver too close to someone else's foot. But over all of it, unmistakably, there's the scent. Sweet, delicate, a little soapy. Rosewater. The cooks barely glance at you. Their hands move in a practiced blur, pounding almonds into paste, stirring cream in brass pans, and dribbling rosewater over everything from sugar wafers to roasted pigeons. There's no dainty teaspoon measuring here. A generous splash for the blancmange, a swig for the marchpane, and why not, a drizzle into the beef broth. You're not dreaming. They really do put rosewater in everything. You reach for a hunk of bread from a nearby table. No butter. Just a soft glaze of what smells like Turkish bathwater. You chew. It's floral. Confusing. Kind of nice, kind of not. But in Tudor England, it's exactly what you're supposed to want. The obsession didn't come from nowhere. Tudor palates were shaped by a medieval legacy of humoral theory. Food wasn't just nourishment. It was balance, health, and virtue on a plate. And rosewater? It was cooling, calming, moistening in the best possible way. Perfect for people who believe too much heat in the body might make you spontaneously combust or develop an excess of melancholy. And then, of course, there was the fashion angle. Rosewater was exotic, imported, pricey. It whispered of Arabia, Persia, and places most Tudor folk couldn't find on a map. So naturally, nobles wanted to drink it, eat it, bathe in it, and even wash their hands with it at banquets. Rose-scented water meant you were refined, wealthy, and very possibly someone who had never done your own laundry. One curious fact, many Tudor cooks didn't make the rosewater themselves. It came in precious little bottles, sometimes imported from Venice or Constantinople, and labeled in a flurry of script no one could really read. Historians still argue whether most of that imported rosewater was actually made in English backrooms by bored apprentices and then slapped with a fake Italian seal. You step further into the kitchen, where a spit boy is turning a pig over the fire. The air is heavy with the scent of meat, ashes, and yes, roses. One cook is making a syrup from quince and sugar, muttering to herself as she adds another splash of rosewater. She tastes it, frowns, and throws in a pinch of cinnamon. You watch as she crushes dried rose petals between her fingers and sprinkles them over the top like a medieval flourish. Even the meats weren't safe. Boiled chicken, rosewater. Stewed mutton, rosewater. Cold venison pasty. Surprise, it's soaked in rosewater and wine. At this point, you're beginning to think they used it more like ketchup. A quick fix for blandness, or worse, spoilage. Because let's face it, refrigeration was not a Tudor specialty. If something smelled a little off, a splash of rosewater could nudge it back toward probably edible. And yes, sometimes it was about covering up less pleasant smells. Hygiene wasn't exactly a kitchen strong point. Rats scamper under the table. Someone just wiped their nose on their sleeve and went back to kneading dough. But don't worry, they'll douse the finished product in rosewater and call it elegant. Here's a little known tidbit. Some recipe books from the era used rosewater and orange blossom water interchangeably, even though they tasted completely different. One poor soul probably expected a citrusy dessert and got a mouthful of potpourri instead. But rosewater wasn't always just for the elite. You wander toward the scullery, where a lower-ranking cook is preparing barley porridge for the household staff. Even here, there's a modest drizzle of rosewater in the mix. Not because they loved the taste, but because rosewater had associations with purity. And if your kitchen didn't reek of it, well, what were you even doing? You lean against a beam, listening to a cook rant about a rival household that served gooseberry tarts without a single drop of rosewater. Barbaric, she says. Just shameful. There's laughter, but also genuine scandal in their eyes. It's like someone suggested serving champagne in a paper cup. Still, the obsession wasn't eternal. You'll see the decline eventually. When fashions shift, citrus and vanilla arrive on the scene, and rosewater starts to smell a bit too much like grandma's soap. But here, in the throes of the Tudor kitchen craze, it reigns supreme. And honestly, you're starting to get used to it. You walk past a tray of honeyed wafers, glistening under a layer of rose syrup. One drops to the floor. A dog grabs it and trots off, tail wagging. Even the animals get a taste of elegance tonight. You take a tentative step into the next chamber. A quieter room, but no less fragrant. It's dimly lit, with thick curtains and heavy carved furniture. Someone's been eating here recently. The table is strewn with half-empty bowls of custard, finger-smudged goblets, and something vaguely jelly-like quivering on a pewter plate. The scent of almonds, cinnamon, and yes, again, rosewater lingers in the warm air. You settle into a bench, running your finger along the rim of a dish. It's a thick, creamy pudding, white as bone, speckled with golden raisins, and unmistakably perfumed. You lean in and sniff. Floral, milky, a little medicinal. You take a bite, and your tongue can't decide if you've just eaten dessert or wandered mouth first into a botanical garden. Tudor puddings were a strange and sticky business. Unlike the modern, polite sponge cakes you might be used to, theirs were often boiled in cloths, sweetened with honey or sugar if you were lucky, and drenched in flavors both bold and baffling. Rosewater was a favorite, especially when combined with things like almond milk, rice flour, or chopped dates, foods that were themselves imports or influenced by Middle Eastern cuisine. This wasn't just nostalgia, it was fashion. Remember, Tudor nobility wanted their food to look and smell rich as well as taste that way. So rosewater wasn't just flavor, it was status. Your custard should remind you, gently but firmly, that you are absolutely better than anyone eating plain oats in the village. But sometimes it got weird. You glance over at another dish. At first, you think it's a tart. But no, that's fish. A heavily spiced eel pie. And it's steaming. You know what's coming. You lean in, and yes, even that is kissed with rosewater. The cooks have taken one of the slimiest, most wriggly river dwellers in the kingdom, smothered it in cloves, ginger, and pepper, wrapped it in a delicate pastry, and brushed the crust with, you guessed it, a floral glaze. No one's quite sure why Tudor cooks thought this made sense. Historians still argue whether rosewater was used here to elevate the dish, or to hide the fact that it was fundamentally just eel in disguise. You bite your tongue, literally, trying to figure out what you're supposed to be feeling. Sweet? Savory? Slightly betrayed? But you wouldn't say that aloud here. These dishes were showpieces, designed for noble tables where guests might be watching from 3 directions and comparing your custard to Lord What's-His-Name's supper from last week. If your marchpane swan didn't glitter, or your sugar castles didn't glisten under a rosewater syrup, what even was the point? There's even a theory, half historical, half delicious gossip, that some Tudors intentionally over-rosewatered their dishes as a power move. Subtlety was for peasants. If your guests weren't coughing gently after dessert, it meant you hadn't used enough. And speaking of coughs, here's a fringe tidbit. Rosewater wasn't just a culinary tool, it was considered medicinal. People genuinely believed it could soothe sore throats, calm frayed nerves, and settle your stomach. So that jelly-like blancmange you're spooning up now? It's dessert and a cure for your latest existential crisis. Take that, modern multivitamins. You watch as a young servant clears dishes from the table, pausing to sniff a congealed syrup on one platter. Her face twitches. She can't decide whether she likes it. You sympathize. Rosewater's odd like that. At first it charms, then it clings. Too much and you feel like you're breathing through a drawer of old perfume samples. You stand and pace around the room, noticing a little book on a nearby shelf. It's a handwritten cookbook. One of those early collections passed between noble women and head cooks, filled with oddly phrased directions like, "Stir it thrice till it falleth flat." You flip through dozens of recipes, and nearly half of them call for rosewater. Pies, pastes, pastries, even roasted nuts. There's one involving egg yolks, crushed pistachios, sugar, and, of course, a great quantity of rosewater, but not everyone loved it. A few scribbled margins suggest some cooks found it overpowering or old-fashioned. One even scrawled, "Too like washing day" beside a pudding recipe. You grin. Apparently, even in the 1500s, people had rosewater fatigue, and yet you can't escape it. In the corner, a nearly empty jug sits beside a bowl of roasted pears. The fruit is soft, glistening, and doused in syrup thickened with honey, and you can smell it from here, steeped with rose petals. You take a bite. The sweetness lingers, but it's almost too clean, too perfumed. It's like kissing someone who just drank floral mouthwash. You sit back and sigh. For all the richness of Tudor cuisine, its reliance on imported spices, its endless stews and roast meats, rosewater is everywhere. A culinary ghost haunting the table. Sometimes delicate, sometimes overwhelming. Always present. Like that friend who insists they're low maintenance, but brings a suitcase full of serums to every sleepover. And here's something else to chew on. Tudor menus were layered. A single feast might include 20 or 30 dishes. Some cold, some hot, some meant to be decorative rather than edible. You'd eat eel pie and quince jelly and candied walnuts and spiced rice pudding, all in the same course. And the one unifying thread through all of it? That telltale nose-tingling splash of rosewater. There's even talk of a failed experiment, rosewater beer. It never caught on. Apparently even Tudor drinkers had limits. Still, tonight, in this candle-lit hall with its tapestry-draped walls and syrup-sticky plates, you're starting to understand the charm. Not the flavor itself, necessarily, but the effect, the aura, the lingering scent of sophistication, and a desire to feel like your supper came with a love letter from the Middle East. You close your eyes and breathe in. Roses again, always roses. The scent changes slightly as you pass through a thick velvet curtain into a narrower hall. Less kitchen, more corridor now. You follow the clink of goblets and the murmur of polished conversation into a long dining chamber, where candlelight dances on silver plates and wax pools like honey on the embroidered tablecloths. You're not just here for the food anymore. Now you're breathing in the social rules behind it. Because rosewater wasn't just an ingredient, it was a message. A fragrant code that whispered, this house is refined. This host is educated. This table belongs to someone who can afford subtlety. You settle into an empty carved chair, fingers brushing a napkin soaked, intentionally of course, in scented water. A servant walks past, pouring rose-scented rinse water into a guest's hands before the next course. It trickles down their fingers like some botanical ritual. You're not just eating here, you're being seen. In Tudor England, everything had to signal your status. What you wore, how you spoke, even what your food smelled like. And rosewater, it was a symbol of elegance so powerful, it bordered on obsession. A meal wasn't complete unless it involved rose-scented meat, rose-scented syrup, or at the very least, a rose-scented hand towel. And if you had enough to perfume your food and the servant's hands, congratulations. You were someone. You glance around. Everyone here is doing it. A lady with an enormous ruffled collar dabs her mouth with a cloth that smells like a garden after rain. A merchant beams as his son eats rose-glazed comfits with sticky fingers. It's like everyone's chasing the same idea, a kind of edible grace. But behind that grace is something more practical, spoilage. Meat didn't last long. Bread went stale. Fish could develop a personality. And spices like cinnamon or nutmeg were expensive. Even pepper had to be measured carefully. So rosewater became a kind of culinary filler. It covered, masked, disguised. You didn't always know if your stew was floral, because it was fashionable, or because it was starting to ferment. There's a roasted bird in front of you, probably a capon. The skin is golden, crisped at the edges, stuffed with cloves and garlic. You lean closer, and there it is again. A delicate sheen of rose-scented glaze across the top. Your nose twitches, and you can't help but wonder if it's seasoning or camouflage. Historians still argue whether rosewater's popularity peaked because of status or sanitation. One theory says Tudor cooks relied on it so heavily because they didn't trust their ingredients. Another claims it was all about taste, a continuation of medieval culinary preferences carried over from Arabic-influenced recipes. And another school of thought says it was a bit of both. People liked it, and it kept things from smelling like doom. Either way, it worked. You sip from a goblet filled with a mild claret. There's something off about the flavor, and then you realize, yes, even the wine's been dosed with rose. It's subtle, like someone dropped a petal in as a joke and forgot to take it out. You imagine the vintner swirling the mixture and muttering something about delicate bouquets with a straight face. But there's something else in the air here. Something not just edible, something ceremonial. You're watching the performance of rosewater. There's a basin at the end of the room, carved from stone and ringed in bronze. Every guest, before sitting, steps forward to wash their hands. A servant pours rosewater from a silver ewer. The guest lets it trickle down, then dries off on linen embroidered with vines and blossoms. No soap, just scent. It's not about cleanliness, it's about ritual. That moment tells you everything you need to know. This isn't just about eating. It's about becoming something, someone, elevated. Even if you're covered in pastry flakes and gravy, you'll smell like courtly restraint. Of course, not everyone appreciated the trend. You catch snippets of gossip between two older women near the hearth. One complains that her niece now perfumes everything, even boiled cabbage with rosewater. It's like dining in a funeral wreath, she huffs, dabbing at her nose. The other nods sagely and mutters something about the French influence, which, in Tudor times, was an easy way to blame anything inconvenient. Still, people kept using it. Nobles, yes, but also wealthy merchants and ambitious tradesmen. You see a young man at the far table. His clothes are fine, but clearly new. He watches the others closely, mimicking the hand washing, the polite dab of napkin to lip, the delicate grip on his goblet. He's trying, like so many, to smell like someone born into it. And here's a curious tidbit. Records show that some homes even burned rose petals to scent their dining rooms before guests arrived. Not incense, literal pots of petals smoldering by the hearth to give the impression of abundance. It's the 16th century version of a scented candle that costs more than your car. Outside, you can hear dogs barking. A servant slips through a side door, carrying a tray of rosewater wafers to the waiting coachman. Even they get a floral send-off. Because in Tudor England, class was olfactory. If your departure didn't smell better than someone's arrival, what were you even doing? You stretch your arms, heavy with the scent of syrup and cooked bird. Everything glistens slightly. Tables, plates, hands, even the floor. A sheen of wealth. A smear of rose-colored meaning. You look up. A painted ceiling overhead depicts vines and cherubs, and of course, roses. Always roses. The dining hall fades behind you as you slip into a smaller, quieter part of the estate. The walls close in, the ceilings lower. You find yourself in a back corner of the manor. The air still faintly floral, but now tinged with something herbal, resinous, and slightly singed. This is the still room. You pause at the door. Inside, it's a world apart from the banquet rooms and polished courtyards. Shelves groan under the weight of ceramic jars and little bottles sealed with wax. Bunches of dried herbs hang from the ceiling like suspended cobwebs. A small fire glows under a copper still, its thin spout catching drips of condensation. And in the center of it all, an older woman stirs a pot filled with soft, pulpy rose petals. She doesn't look up as you enter. Her hands move automatically, carefully placing petals into muslin, tying it off, lowering it into gently simmering water. You realize this is the engine behind all those elegant meals. This is where the rosewater comes from. Most Tudor estates had a still room like this, not just for rosewater, but for all manner of concoctions, herbal oils, medicinal syrups, preserves, salves, and even the occasional curious elixir. It was often the domain of women, especially noble women or trusted housekeepers, who oversaw the quiet, steady alchemy of domestic life. This wasn't cooking. This was closer to science, or maybe, if you squint, closer to sorcery, because even though this was a respectable part of the household, the line between medicine and magic was thin. You sit on a low stool and watch as the woman adds a splash of distilled rosewater into a small bottle labeled for hot tempers. Another one, thicker, is smeared onto a cloth for night coughs. You spot jars labeled with things like Queen of Hungry Water, Syrup of Violets, and something deeply mysterious called Dragon's Breath Decoction. You reach toward a vial, and the woman finally speaks. "That one's for melancholy," she says. "But it tastes like soap." You believe her. Still rooms weren't just productive, they were protective. Tudor medicine believed in balance, in keeping the humors in harmony. Rosewater was thought to cool the body, calm the mind, and even ease heartbreak. A spoonful could be added to a drink to quiet a racing pulse. Dabbed on temples for headaches, sprinkled on bed sheets to promote restful sleep. Although you suspect the strong floral scent might have just knocked people out from sheer intensity, there's a quiet power here. This woman isn't a court physician or apothecary, but she controls a vital part of the household's health, its memory, even its mood. That's why many noble women took pride in still room training. It offered authority in a world where authority didn't come easily. You recall stories of queens personally crafting remedies or instructing their daughters in the art of distillation. This wasn't just domestic duty, it was legacy. You lean closer to the copper still, watching as the condensed rose-scented water trickles into a bowl, drop by drop. The smell is lighter than you expected, less like perfume, more like early morning dew in a garden that hasn't quite woken up. Not all rose waters were created equal. The kind used in medicine was often purer, less sugary, sometimes mixed with alcohol to act as a tincture. The culinary version could be thicker, sweeter, sometimes boiled down with honey or spiced with cinnamon. And depending on how it was made, it could keep for weeks or turn sour by next Tuesday. Historians still argue whether Tudor recipes exaggerated their rosewater content because they liked the taste, or because they had to use it up quickly before it went bad. One theory even suggests they wrote rose water in every other recipe just to make their kitchens sound fancier in print. Which, honestly, sounds like something a bored noble would do. But back here, in the still room, it's all real. The petals are picked, the water drawn, the bottles sealed and labeled by hand. You glance at a window where someone's placed a few drying roses on the sill. They're wilted now, their pink edges curling like old paper. But they still smell. Like memory, you feel a shift. The woman is no longer working alone. A younger girl has joined her, watching the process with wide eyes, mimicking the careful pouring, the slow stirring. You wonder how many generations have passed through at this quiet corner. How many women kept their families healthy, their food fragrant, and their reputations spotless using nothing more than petals and patience. Here's a quirky detail. Some households used rosewater not just for people, but for pets. Dogs in noble homes were occasionally dabbed with floral water to make them smell more indoorsy. One nobleman reportedly kept a bottle by the door for his hunting hounds, claiming it soothed the humors of their tempers. You imagine a grumpy spaniel glistening faintly under a veil of rosewater and try not to laugh. And it wasn't all roses, literally. Still rooms also made lavender water, chamomile tonics, and even distilled vinegar for cleaning wounds. But rosewater had that extra edge. It was versatile, beautiful, useful, and just obscure enough to feel magical. You rest your chin in your hands and breathe deeply. The scent is everywhere, soft now. No longer the aggressive perfume of the banquet hall, but something subtler, more honest. For all the extravagance of Tudor dining, it was these quiet corners, the still rooms, the gardens, the midnight boiling pots, that made it possible. You start to understand how something as delicate as rosewater could come to saturate an entire era. It wasn't just flavor. It was a whisper of care, a shimmer of tradition, a little bit of protection you could pour into your tea. And here, in the stillness, surrounded by flowers turned into medicine, you find yourself wondering, what do we lose when we stop perfuming our food with memories? The manner grows quiet as evening deepens, and the scent of rosewater seems to follow you like a ghost, lingering in the corners of your mind, just faint enough to make you wonder if it's really there. You find yourself in the last room of the house, smaller than the others, lined with narrow shelves and a long oak counter. This isn't a kitchen or a still room, it's an apothecary, and yet, guess what's front and center? Rows of vials shimmer in the candlelight. Some contain dried roots, others oily tinctures. But nestled among them, with a delicate paper label, is a fat bottle of rosewater. The handwriting is faded, the edges stained. A hand has written simply, "For fevers, griefs, breath." You exhale slowly. Even now, in a place devoted to science and medicine, at least Tudor style, rosewater has found its place. Tudor apothecaries were a chaotic blend of doctor, chemist, herbalist, and semi-licensed wizard. They worked with what they had: herbs, minerals, oils, animal parts, and lots of trial and error. Sometimes they cured you. Sometimes they gave you powdered emeralds and called it a day. But in this softly lit space, you get the sense they truly tried. You lean over the counter and scan the scribbled instructions. Rosewater mixed with vinegar to reduce heat in the body. Rosewater with crushed pearls to restore the complexion. Rosewater soaked into linen and laid over the heart during bouts of sorrow. You blink. That one's poetic. Practical too, maybe. Rosewater wasn't just a flavor or a perfume. It was the all-purpose comfort item. A Tudor multi-tool. Feeling faint? Rosewater. Overheated? Rosewater. Mourning a loved one? Absolutely rosewater. Maybe with a little myrrh if you were dramatic. There's even a powder in the corner labeled for the brain. You carefully read the recipe. Dried rosemary, sage, and rose petals ground to dust, then stirred into warm milk. It promises a settling of choleric storms. You'd try it if you trusted the milk. One fringe belief? That rosewater could repair the sad vapors of the spleen. This apparently referred to depression or nervous melancholy. The idea was that floral scents could lift your spirits, literally push the bad air out of your brain. A few physicians even insisted that rosewater's scent alone could prevent fainting spells in women of delicate disposition, which back then basically meant anyone mildly inconvenienced by patriarchy. You crack a smile. The Tudors were weird, but not entirely wrong. Aromatherapy, stress relief through scent, the gentle ritual of preparing something lovely. It's not far off from how people today treat their morning matcha or essential oils. Sure, they didn't know about serotonin or cortisol, but they understood that comfort matters. Historians still debate whether rosewater's medical role was more placebo than panacea. One camp argues that its soothing effects were mostly psychological, an elegant, fragrant distraction from the real horror of Tudor illness. The other suggests that rose petals contain trace anti-inflammatory compounds, and that maybe, just maybe, rosewater really did something. Maybe both are true. Maybe it just felt like it worked, which when you're sick is sometimes enough. You notice a worn leather-bound ledger on the shelf. Flipping through, you see entries like, for Lady Martin's nerves, 2 drops rosewater on tongue, 3x daily. Child's fever, linens bathed in rosewater, wrung and applied warm. Old captain's breath, rinses of rose vinegar and rose syrup. You try not to imagine the breath in question. One curious detail, there were rosewater lozenges. Sweet, chalky little discs designed to soothe the throat or freshen the mouth. You find a jar of them now, crumbly and pale pink, each stamped with a faint swirl. You pop one in your mouth. It tastes like your grandmother's perfume. And a sugar cube had a mild disagreement. Even into the late Tudor period, rosewater persisted. While new medical trends emerged, humoral theory slowly fading, more chemical approaches creeping in, people still clung to rosewater. Not just because it worked, but because it was gentle, familiar. It didn't blister the skin or make you vomit like mercury or powdered toad might. It simply softened things. You sit on a low stool beside the hearth, watching the final flames dance. A pot simmers gently, just warm water now, with a few rose petals floating on top. You cup your hands around the rising steam and breathe in. The scent is faint but comforting, clean, not medicinal, not perfumed, just soft. And in this quiet moment, it all settles. The banquet, the pudding, the still room, the rituals, the way rosewater wove its way through every layer of Tudor life. Not just as a flavor, but as a balm. A little luxury wrapped in tradition. A petal-thin line between the elegant and the edible. You close your eyes and lean back. The rosewater is still in the air. It always was. But while one tale settles into silence, another begins to stir. Quietly, gently. We slip quietly into the polished world of Victorian domestic service, where your morning begins not with coffee, but with the ritualistic brushing of someone else's top hat. You're the butler of a very large, very drafty, extremely chandelier-heavy estate. The house sleeps for now, but you don't. No, you rise before the roosters, before the sun, before even the scullery maids. There are boots to buff, wine to breathe, and shoes, so many shoes, to inspect, straighten, and if necessary, lace, with the utmost care. Because if you think snapping a shoelace is a minor inconvenience, try explaining it to Lord Ashcombe moments before he strolls into the drawing room to impress the Hungarian ambassador. You probably won't survive this. You tug on your waistcoat, adjust the angle of your cravat in the mirror, and glance down at your shoes. Your real shoes. Not the house shoes you wear to glide silently over oak floors. Those live on a high shelf, where no guest could possibly glimpse their creases. The laces are strong. You made certain of that last night, as you do every night, tying and untying them 4 times until the bow sits just so. And inside your pocket, A neat bundle of 2 spare laces, waxed and looped, ready for crisis. You never know. When Lady Forrester's new terrier will nip at your ankle during a tray delivery. The little beast has teeth like sewing needles and a grudge against your ankles. It's entirely possible that somewhere in its shaggy little brain, it still thinks you're the one who replaced its favorite footstool with a fern. You descend the back stairs like a phantom, already smelling the faint scent of coal smoke and old bacon. The scullery maids will be down soon, all clatter and gossip. But for now, the kitchen belongs to silence and you. You unlock the pantry and glance over the wine decanting station, checking that the claret has had its full airing. You sniff the corks, not because you're some sort of sommelier, but because old corks sometimes go moldy. And if a guest gets even the faintest whiff of that, you'll be explaining it to cook, who will then explain it to the housekeeper, who will then imply, very politely, that you've failed the entire household. You feel the weight of the ring of keys at your side. Dozens of them. One for the silver safe, one for the linen cupboard, one for the basement where the questionable cheeses live. But no key is more sacred than the one that opens the hall cabinet, the butler's arsenal, where the spare shoelaces live in military rows next to boot polish, glove stretchers, and 3 unlabeled tins that you think might contain emergency marzipan. No one knows. No one dares open them. The shoelaces themselves are oddly expensive, waxed to resist moisture and fray, and knotted at the tips so they never disappear through the eyelets during a frantic lacing. They are black, always black, unless the master is in mourning, in which case they must be blacker. Historians still argue whether butlers had to match their shoelace sheen to the tone of the host's mood or merely the weather. Regardless, you are prepared for both drizzle and existential despair. You check the dining room. The table is laid, forks precisely 1.25 inches from the plate edges. Knives gleam, turned outward just slightly to catch the candlelight without dazzling the guests. You take a moment to adjust one napkin fold, triangle instead of bishop's mitre, and feel the whisper of satisfaction as everything lines up. It is absurd, but so is the fact that Lord Ashcombe insists his marmalade spoon rest on a chilled saucer. You glance up at the grand clock as it chimes. 6:15. The staff breakfast bell will ring in 15 minutes, which gives you exactly enough time to double-check the footman uniforms. You pass by their quarters, linen bundles neatly stacked, hats lined up like a row of ducklings, and reach the main hallway, where the real test awaits, the guest shoe rack. Each pair awaits shining. Some have soles worn nearly to mist, which must be polished in such a way that they look new without actually being walked in. It's a dance, a deception, one that you are trained in like a magician. And then, of course, the laces, sometimes undone entirely, sometimes one loop awkwardly poking out like a cowlick. You retie them all. Perfect bows, equal length ends. You tug one gently to test its strength. Snap, of course. And this, dear listener, is where your spares come in. You produce a new lace from your pocket, like a stage magician pulling scarves from a sleeve. Slide it into place with practiced grace, and tie the bow so neatly it could make a duchess weep. This is the unspoken dread of the Victorian butler. Not war, not scandal, not even the accidental misplacement of the parlor fire tongs. No, it is a snap shoelace, discovered too late, when guests are arriving, and your only options are to run to the servants' wing in full view, or hide your shame beneath a decorative rug and hope no one notices you're limping. There's one story, mostly whispered among the help, of a butler who carried not just spare laces, but tiny scissors, tweezers, a needle and thread, and a folded patch of leather in a hidden pocket sewn into his morning coat. They say he once replaced an entire heel cap during a 5-minute toast. Possibly apocryphal, possibly true. Either way, the message is clear. Preparedness is sacred. And speaking of sacred, the bell rings. Not the master's bell, yet, but the call to breakfast. You'll eat with the staff, on slightly chipped plates, beneath a portrait of a hound that may or may not have eaten the last housemaid's knitting project. You'll eat quickly, because Lord Ashcombe's valet once sprained an ankle on the stairs, and you were asked, only once, but still, to tie a Windsor knot for his lordship. Your laces are secure, your steps are quiet, and your morning, so far, is unremarkably perfect, which is exactly how you like it. You're in the drawing room now, smoothing invisible wrinkles from the velvet curtain edges with the back of your knuckles. An entirely pointless but soothing ritual, really. The fire has been laid just so, not lit yet, of course, because it's only 9 o'clock a.m., and Victorian fires must not appear eager. A roaring hearth at the wrong hour is socially jarring, like an overdressed cousin at a picnic. You know this. You've seen the consequences, because once, just once, there was a shoelace incident that unraveled everything, quite literally. It was the spring ball of 1878, and Lord Ashcombe was hosting an evening so exclusive that even the chandeliers felt self-conscious. The Hungarian ambassador was expected, along with Lady Tillingham, whose diamonds have their own seat in the carriage. All was proceeding with the usual elegance until, precisely 6 minutes before the first guest arrived, you noticed it. The left lace, frayed, frighteningly close to snapping, and Lord Ashcombe, ever the nimble aristocrat, had just returned from his fencing lesson with the lace pulled tight, too tight. You tried to intervene with tact. My lord, might I suggest a minor adjustment to your footwear ensemble? But he waved you off with the breezy confidence of someone who's never personally laced a shoe. So you watched, helplessly, as the string gave way on the top step. The fall wasn't catastrophic. He landed more or less upright, but his monocle flew. A decorative fern tipped, and the ambassador arrived just in time to see your employer on all fours, swearing in French. It is said the ambassador mistook this for a cultural greeting. They've been pen pals ever since. Still, the fallout for you? Severe. Lady Ashcombe insisted the entire butler's emergency kit be reviewed. A new lacing protocol was established. From that day on, you were required to carry not just 2, but 3 pairs of spare laces. One for yourself, one for his lordship, and one in the event of sudden guest distress. It sounds dramatic, but the Victorians were very anxious about appearances. They even had manuals. Dozens. Entire tomes dedicated to etiquette, glove thicknesses, proper hat angles, and yes, even shoelace maintenance. One particularly overzealous guide suggested butlers test laces by dragging them through sugar to simulate ballroom stickiness. You tried this. Once. It attracted ants, and you spent a week apologizing to the housekeeper with peppermint sachets. This is how the butler's pocket standard came to be. A silent competition among staff across England. Tiny kits, invisible to the eye, sewn into lapels, coats, even boot linings, each one slightly different. Some had minuscule shoehorns carved from ivory, others carried emergency handkerchief starch, cufflink polish, or smelling salts. Yours is practical. Laces, waxed, a foldable button hook, one small mirror for checking your own posture, and because you are not a fool, 3 wrapped barley sugar candies to bribe the younger guests should they decide to hide behind the curtains again. You caught one chewing on the tassels last week. The child, not the curtain. Though honestly, you've seen both. Historians still argue whether this level of personal preparedness was truly expected or simply a form of servant one-upmanship, a sort of discreet flex. But one thing is certain. Among the domestic elite, no one wanted to be caught without something. Even your footman rivals have taken to tucking combs into their socks and peppermints beneath their cravats. You take a moment now to glance out the front window, just beyond the heavy damask. The gravel drive is being swept. Again. even though it rained all night and the stones are spotless. But this is Victorian England. Cleanliness is godliness, and repetition is its slightly twitchy cousin. Down in the cellar, your emergency polished tin collection is growing. You have 9 now, 8 black, 1 oxblood, just in case Lord Ashcombe suddenly decides to experiment with Italian footwear, as he once threatened during a wine tasting. You've rehearsed entire conversations in your head about how oxblood clashes with the drapes. You hope never to use them. You hear the familiar ding from the bellboard. Library, 1 ring. That means his lordship has finally settled down with the newspaper and is ready for his tea. This is your moment. Tray, already prepared. Cup handle turned precisely to the right. Saucer spotless. Sugar cubes pre-counted. You walk the corridor with the quiet confidence of a man who knows how to replace a shoelace mid-curtsy. You knock once. The door opens. You glide in. Lord Ashcombe barely glances up, but he mutters, "The left one's gone loose again." You kneel. Not dramatically, just politely. And with swift, practiced motion, produce a fresh lace, remove the faulty one, and tie a knot so elegant it could be submitted to the Royal Academy of Art. He grunts in satisfaction, sips his tea, and resumes reading. A moment later, he chuckles to himself. Did I ever tell you about the time I tripped in front of the Hungarian ambassador? You smile. Frequently, my lord. That night, back in your quarters, you sit down on the hard little chair by your window, take off your shoes, and lay out your laces like relics. You check for fray, stretch, and symmetry. All must be perfect. Because in this world, perfection isn't just expected. It's enforced with passive-aggressive sighs and handwritten notes about standard slipping. You pin a new bundle of laces into your coat lining. Just in case. Always just in case. Because someday, someone's going to trip again. And you'll be ready. It's well past mid-morning now, and the house hums with structured chaos. Maids whisking past with lavender sachets, gardeners clipping roses to mathematically correct lengths, and you, the butler, navigating the entire operation like a conductor with severely limited emotional expression. You pause to ensure that the corner of a tapestry isn't drooping. It is, scandalously, by nearly half an inch. And as you reach to straighten it, you catch your reflection in the gilt-edged mirror. Your collar is crisp, your posture upright, your shoelaces secure. All is as it should be. Until, of course, the hierarchy situation arises. It starts innocuously. A new footman arrives. Wilfred, freckled, ambitious, and far too cheerful for someone who voluntarily irons trousers at 6 a.m. You welcome him with a nod, a suggestion to mute his footsteps, and a general warning not to breathe too heavily near Lady Ashcombe's porcelain spaniel collection. But Wilfred is, unfortunately, a fast learner. Within days, he is moving with disturbing grace, bowing at all the right angles, and most treacherous of all, mastering the art of the stiff collar. The Victorian stiff collar is not a mere accessory. It is a battleground. Starched to the consistency of boiled bone, it must sit high and merciless beneath the chin. Too low, and you look slovenly. Too high, and you risk death by paper cut to the jugular every time you nod. There's even a rumor that one butler in Dorset had to be surgically separated from his collar after a damp morning fog caused a starch-related fusion. Likely apocryphal, but still, you never take chances with laundry sorcery. Today, Wilfred's collar is impeccable. Too impeccable. Worse, he's been asked to shadow the valet, mind you, and is now being trusted with tasks that brush dangerously close to your domain. He's even polishing the silver tongs, a duty normally reserved for only the most senior staff, or those with the mental fortitude to endure 13 minutes of reflection on their own distorted face in gleaming metal. You say nothing. You are serene. You are composed. But inwardly, you tighten your shoelaces. The hierarchy of Victorian household staff is more delicate than a souffle made of egos. At the top, of course, is the butler. You, quiet, omnipresent, in charge of wine, keys, crises, and the ritual scaring of delivery boys. Below you, the valet, who serves the master personally, the housekeeper, a woman of formidable schedule enforcement, the cook, an artist with zero tolerance for opinions, and the maids, footmen, and scullery tribe that make up the ever-grinding gears of the estate. But even within those ranks, there are invisible lines. A first footman must never handle laundry. A second housemaid must never address a guest directly. And under no circumstances must a valet ever be mistaken for a footman. That actually happened once, at Lord Dunshire's estate. The valet had to emigrate to Canada under a false name and now runs a dairy. Historians still argue whether these rules were rooted in efficiency or sheer British stubbornness. The result was the same either way. A rigid system of manners, codes, and glances so loaded with implication that a single raised eyebrow could end a career. You recall one unfortunate moment at a neighbouring estate, Lady Margrove's annual garden luncheon. The butler there had worn soft-soled shoes. He claimed they reduced joint strain. But during a stroll across the gravel path, the lack of audible footfall led to a guest being startled into spilling elderflower cordial. The butler was quietly reassigned to a lighthouse in Kent. The message was clear. Sounds matter. Rank matters. Even your shoelace squeak could make or break you. You inspect Wilfred from across the hall. He's standing just a bit too tall, smiling too openly, wearing... Is that a custom collar pin? Dear heaven, time to assert control. You summon him with a gentle ahem and guide him to the breakfast room, where the cutlery must be reset for the 5th time today. A harmless task. Quiet, meditative, also infuriating. The forks must be placed just so, each one angled at 12 degrees, with tines up, except during luncheon, when they face down. Don't ask why. No one knows. It just is. While Wilfred fumbles a spoon, you slip into an explanation of the differences between household polishings. Lemon for the silver, vinegar for the brass, and a mysterious substance called bluing for linens, which you've never fully understood but fear deeply. You deliver the information in the soft, relentless tone of a bedtime lullaby that somehow leaves one feeling deeply inadequate. Wilfred's collar starts to droop slightly with sweat. Success. You end with the tale of Mr. Pembroke, a former butler who forgot to replace a cracked wine glass before the arrival of a Russian count. The glass shattered mid-toast. The count bled, dramatically, onto a canapé. Mr. Pembroke is now a travelling umbrella salesman and refuses to discuss anything crystalline. Wilfred nods solemnly and goes off in search of more forks. You remain in the room for a moment longer, satisfied that order has been restored. Your place at the top is secure, at least for now. As you adjust a napkin for the 12th time, you catch a glimpse of your own reflection again. And for just a second, you wonder if you were once that eager young staffer, hoping to rise, to impress, to matter. Perhaps. But somewhere along the way, you learned that in this house, in this world, survival depends not just on effort, but on knowing exactly where you stand, preferably in well-laced shoes. By afternoon, the house has settled into that peculiar post-luncheon lull. The guests are napping, reading, or pretending to read while quietly judging the interior moldings. You, however, are very much not at rest. You are in the drawing room again, reviewing the cutlery ledger. Yes, a ledger, for spoons, 42 of them to be exact. Every one meticulously catalogued by type, material, and purpose. Jelly spoons, mustard spoons, egg spoons, 2 varieties, marrow spoons, and something called a grapefruit leaf curl fork that you've never dared question. You must ensure that every spoon is accounted for, polished, and placed in its correct orientation. And to think your childhood dreams involved exploration. You run a finger down the polished wood of the spoon drawer. A locked drawer, naturally, with a velvet lining so luxurious it probably has its own social life. The keys to this drawer hang from your chain, nestled between the pantry key and the rarely used larder panic latch key, which exists solely in case someone gets trapped between the pheasants and the pickles. It's happened twice. You pause, counting the soup spoons. You always pause at the soup spoons. There are never the same number from day to day. It's as if they wander at night, searching for better service. Once you found one lodged behind the wainscoting. No one ever admitted how it got there. Of course, some blame the bells. The bellboard hangs above the servant stairs like a nervous system for the house. Little flags tremble when a guest pulls a cord. Drawing room, morning room, boudoir. The library. 3 short rings for tea, 1 long ring for alarm, 2 rings for I spilled my port again. You've memorized the rhythm of each bell so completely that you sometimes hear them in your dreams. There was even one time when the scullery maid dropped a tray and you, startled, ran 3 rooms over with a sewing kit and a cheese knife before realizing it was just clatter. The guests have their own rhythms too. Lord Ashcombe prefers his claret decanted no less than 3 hours before supper and insists it be served at precisely 61 degrees Fahrenheit. Lady Ashcombe has a system for her letter writing paper. 1 sheet for correspondence, 1 for poetry drafts, and 1, never to be used, for writing apologies. She has never written an apology in her life. And you? You have the silver code. Each piece of silver has its own weight, shape, and feel. You know them by touch. The dessert fork with the bent tine. That's for Cousin Horace, who uses it to stir his pudding like a potion. The fish knife with the ripple in the blade. That's Lord Avery's. He swears it improves the flavor. And of course, there's the infamous cheese slicer, which must never be placed to the left of the pickle fork. Why? Historians still argue whether the arrangement was designed for function or for the pleasure of driving butlers quietly mad. You remember vividly the day the cheese slicer incident occurred. A young underfootman, newly trained, placed the slicer on the wrong side. Only once. But Lady Wilhelmina noticed. She paused, frowned, did not speak. But 2 weeks later, a single, unsigned note appeared in the underfootman's drawer. There are standards. He left that evening and now teaches fencing in Devon. You exhale slowly, restoring the cutlery to its velvet grave. The bells jingle softly behind you. Drawing room. 3 short rings. Tea. You glide to the kitchen. The tea tray is already half prepared, the maid having wisely anticipated the need. You inspect the cups, no chips, the sugar tongs, polished, and the lemon slices, no seeds. Everything is correct, except the teaspoon. You hold it up to the light. Not the spoon, not the one Lady Ashcombe insists upon. This one is fractionally heavier, barely perceptible to the human eye, but her ladyship's fingers are like scales. You retrieve the correct spoon, handle engraved with a barely visible A, and replace it, sliding it into place as if disarming a trap, which, in a way, you are. You carry the tray with absolute stillness, despite the hallway rug having developed a treacherous ripple near the corner. You dodge it like a matador, entering the drawing room with the poise of someone whose whole reputation rides on not spilling oolong on the Aubusson carpet. Lady Ashcombe doesn't even look up as you set the tray down, but she reaches delicately for her spoon. She stirs once, sips, says nothing. You have succeeded. Back in the hall, you allow yourself a single blink of satisfaction. Then you hear it. The bell again. This time, 2 short, 1 long. Library. Lord Ashcombe's preferred signal for where the devil is my bookmark. You fetch the red ribbon from the bookshelf drawer. It's always red. and make your way down the hall. Your laces squeak softly on the polished floorboards. A reassuring sound. Presence. Purpose. You are never seen arriving. You are simply there, with the needed object, before anyone has quite realized they required it. You think back to the first time you handled the silver cabinet key. It felt heavy in your palm, not just from weight, but from responsibility. You were told then, this house runs on silver and silence. Master both, and you'll last. You took that to heart, and so you have. And when the guests finally emerge from their rooms for the evening dinner, you'll be waiting. You'll know who prefers their water without ice, who insists on butter with a curl, who will drop a spoon, and who will feign surprise as if it weren't planned. You'll know the code, the rhythm, the glint of expectation in a glance, all of it. All while carrying 3 spare shoelaces in your coat pocket, just in case one slips from view. Evening has fallen across the estate, wrapping the manor in a velvet hush. Lamps glow behind heavy curtains, casting pools of amber light across the floors you've already polished twice today. Upstairs, the guests are dressing for dinner. Corsets creak, cufflinks clink, and somewhere, someone is calling for more hairpins in a voice that suggests emergency surgery. And you are gliding through the ballroom, alone, for now. Inspecting the floor for scuff marks, potential slipper hazards, or, worst of all, a stray dance card left behind by a sentimental debutante with poor handwriting. Your shoes make barely a whisper, each step measured, soft, and steady. The laces are tight, the coat is smooth, your breath is slow, deliberate. You are preparing for the final performance of the day. Dinner service. The social climax of any Victorian evening, where everyone is pretending to eat while silently ranking each other's napkin folds. There is no room for mistakes here. One crooked cravat, one sore strip on a damask tablecloth, and you might find yourself reassigned to the greenhouse, among the carnivorous plants and passive-aggressive ferns. You pass the sideboard and double-check the wine decanters. The claret is the correct temperature. The port has been dusted. Yes, dusted. And the sherry bottle is aligned with such military precision that if Napoleon himself were reincarnated as a wine steward, he'd salute. Your mind drifts for just a second to a memory. A moment from years ago when things weren't quite so well orchestrated. It was the year of the shoelace scandal. Yes, that year. A now retired butler, Mr. Fenwick, known for his questionable taste in waistcoat patterns, was caught attempting to sell spare shoelaces to the junior staff for a profit. He had cornered the lace market after rumors of a shortage caused minor panic in 3 nearby estates. Fenwick stored them in a hollowed-out volume of Pilgrim's Progress. When Lady Ashcombe discovered the racket, after a lace snapped mid-curtsy at her sister's wedding, Fenwick was dismissed with exactly 5 minutes to pack, and a parting note that simply read, "A gentleman never monetizes preparedness." Historians still argue whether Fenwick's downfall was due to the lace selling itself, or his unfortunate choice of lavender-scented wax. You, of course, learned from this. You never hoard laces. You rotate them, clean them. You've even implemented a discreet logbook, tucked into the back of the pantry, where each lace is numbered and tracked. You don't sell them, but there is a small, whispered economy in favors. Should a footman need a new pair on short notice, a polished brass button or hot pie left on your windowsill goes a long way. And now, as the guests descend, floating like overdressed swans, you station yourself by the dining room entrance. You nod at the footman, you review hand signals, you glance down. A lace, loose, not yours. Thank heavens. One of the guests' shoes, a young gentleman, full of swagger and at least 3 sherries deep. He doesn't notice, but you do. You move swiftly, silently. Reaching down as if to retrieve a napkin, you tuck the lace back in with a single, practiced gesture, never breaking stride, never making eye contact. He stumbles for a second, blinks, thinks better of it, keeps walking. Your world remains intact. Dinner proceeds without incident. You monitor the wine pours. You adjust the placement of a fallen spoon with such elegance it could be choreographed. You maintain the illusion that this house, this moment, is perfect, unflappable, timeless. You even catch Wilfred, the eager young footman, watching you with quiet awe. His collar is stiff, his shoes polished, but his laces slightly uneven. A good effort, not yet perfect. Later, after the guests retire and the lamps are dimmed, you find yourself back in the butler's pantry. The house is quiet now, wrapped in the soft creaks of old wood and distant snoring. You sit, loosen your shoes, stretch your fingers, and pull the ledger from its shelf. Page 98, shoelace inventory. You make your final entries. 2 deployed today. 1 lost to a spill in the smoking room. Replacements required by Thursday. And then you pause. You think about the years, the crises, the hierarchy, the guests who came and went, the footmen who rose, fell, or ran off with the scullery maids, the silver spoons, the bell rings, the endless lace knots tied and retied like the loops of time itself. You once thought you'd leave this life, open a shop, maybe take a steamer to America, sell umbrellas, something exciting. But you stayed, because in this quiet, candlelit world of ritual and polish, you found a strange kind of peace, a place where dignity is measured not in words, but in steadiness. Clean cuffs, correct forks, and shoelaces that never, ever snap. You close the ledger, tuck your spare laces back into their pocket, and step out once more into the hallway. Just to make sure everything is still, perfectly in place, because it is, because you are. Close that chapter now. Not with a slam, but a soft sigh. Another waits just ahead. We step into the scratchy, faintly sour-smelling world of medieval hair care, where shampoo isn't a sleek plastic bottle in your shower caddy, but maybe a bowl of rainwater, a handful of weeds, or if you're feeling brave, boiled lye. You're walking through the early centuries, right past the luxury of modern cleanliness, into an era where washing your hair was about as appealing and dangerous as jousting blindfolded. You probably won't survive this with your hairline intact. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a muddy village path, toes curled in your worn leather shoes, head itchy under your linen coif. It's the year 860, and if you want clean hair, you're going to have to work for it. First off, shampoo, as a word or concept, doesn't really exist. What you have instead is water, suspicion, and whatever you can scrape from the garden or boil in a pot. Let's start with the basics. Woad. Yes, that blue stuff. More famously known for dyeing the bodies of Celtic warriors into terrifying smurfs during battle, woad also had a little domestic side hustle. Some sources suggest people used woad leaves not just for color, but also for their astringent, mildly cleansing properties. You mash up the leaves, mix them with water, and rub the paste into your scalp. The result? A tingly, slightly purple scalp that might smell faintly of cabbage. Fabulous. Of course, most peasants didn't have the luxury of special herbs or free time. You're mostly relying on water, and even that is approached with a certain mistrust. River water could carry disease, and hot baths were rumored to open your pores to all sorts of bodily corruption. Still, on a warm spring morning, you might crouch beside a stream and pour cold water over your head, rubbing in a bit of sand or ash to help lift the grime. Exfoliation, the medieval edition. The word lye starts to enter the picture here, and this is where things get, frankly, terrifying. Lye is made by dripping water through wood ash and collecting the resulting alkaline liquid. It's caustic, strong-smelling, and exactly what you want near your eyeballs at 6 o'clock a.m., apparently. Used in soap making, when soap existed, lye solutions could also be applied to hair, but only if you were prepared to lose a layer of scalp. Historians still argue whether lye-based washes were widespread among common folk or reserved for soap makers and risk takers. The truth is murky. Like everything else in your wooden bucket, if you were lucky, or just inventive, you might improvise with what's around. A gritty mix of barley flour and egg yolks could be scrubbed through the hair, followed by a rinse in beer or sour milk. Yes, people willingly poured beer on their heads. Before you judge, just remember, your clarifying shampoo probably has apple cider vinegar in it, and this smells about the same. But beer, particularly the unfiltered medieval stuff, added a bit of shine and body to hair, and possibly attracted squirrels. Win some, lose some. Interestingly, there's a mainstream historical fact that pops up here. Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor himself, was reportedly very particular about bathing. He had a personal bathhouse and enjoyed soaking with friends and family. Awkward, suggesting that personal hygiene wasn't entirely alien to the early medieval elite. Whether he had someone lather his royal scalp with lavender and hops rinse remains undocumented, but the man was clean, for the time. Meanwhile, peasants lived in a state of what modern dermatologists might call natural oil equilibrium, a polite way of saying that their scalps were probably a greasy battlefield of survival. But don't assume they were filthy. Dirt, yes, but filth. That's a value judgment. Your body eventually adapts to its environment. Many peasants developed calloused skin and hair that more or less stabilized, if you could stand the smell. Then there's the fringe tidbit that some early folks used moss. Not as a cleanser, but as a sort of scalp buffer, rubbed in to absorb oils and removed before feasts or religious festivals. Imagine peeling moss off your scalp like a temporary toupee and calling it your fresh look. As you step past the blacksmith's hut, the smoke drifting into your face and mingling with the stink of animal fat, you pass a woman with waist-length hair tucked into a braid so thick it could stop a sword. She nods to you, and you notice she smells surprisingly herbal. Maybe she's one of the lucky ones with access to dried thyme or chamomile, steeped and cooled into a rinse. Or maybe she's just embraced the musk. It's hard to tell. What you can tell is this. Nobody in your village owns a comb with teeth finer than a rake. You might use fingers, twigs, or a shared lice stick. And no, we don't want to dwell on that. There's no getting around it. Medieval shampoo is less about squeaky clean and more about getting by. You scrub when you can, rinse when the stream isn't frozen, and hope your head doesn't develop a nest. You walk home that evening, the sun slipping down behind the trees, your scalp tingling from the vinegar rinse experiment you tried earlier. Your head smells like salad dressing, but it's the cleanest it's been in weeks. And tomorrow? Maybe you'll try boiling some rosemary, or maybe you'll just wear your hood low and call it a style. You wake up with straw in your hair again. Not metaphorical, actual straw. Your makeshift pillow has exploded in the night, and now you're part human, part scarecrow. But the sun is rising, the cockerel is doing his dramatic warm-ups outside, and your scalp is feeling dry. Not dirty, just tight. Today feels like a day for herbs. You shuffle outside, cross the narrow garden plot behind your cottage, and begin gathering anything that smells halfway decent. Medieval folk didn't exactly have hair care aisles, but what they did have were gardens and a solid helping of paranoia. The idea of clean hair wasn't just cosmetic. It was tied up with ideas of health, purity, even morality. Take rosemary, for example. Still used today in modern shampoos for its stimulating properties, rosemary was a medieval superstar. You pluck a few sprigs from the edge of your neighbor's fence. He owes you after that cabbage incident, and crush them between your fingers. The oil releases immediately, fragrant and sharp. People in your time believed rosemary helped circulation, warded off evil, and possibly kept the brain sharp. Whether or not it actually cleaned the scalp was secondary. It felt like it did, and that's enough. Next, you eye the nettles. Yes, Those nettles, the ones that sting. With gloves, or just your rough, regret-resistant hands, you cut a few down and toss them into a pot. Boil, cool, rinse. The result? A dark green brew that smells vaguely like feet, but allegedly strengthens hair and keeps it from falling out. Historians still argue whether nettles were genuinely used in hair care or more for joint pain and stew thickening. But if you're desperate, you'll try anything. In goes the vinegar. Apple cider, cloudy, homemade by someone who swears they saw a monk doing it once. Vinegar was, and is, a natural rinse that balances pH and adds shine. In your time, it also carries a whiff of suspicion. Some say it drives out bad humors from the head. Others say it just makes your hair too slippery for lice to hang on. That's reason enough. As you pour the cool mixture over your head, you grimace. It burns a little where you scratched too hard last night. But now the ritual begins. The vigorous massage. Medieval people believed rubbing your scalp regularly helped keep it open, encouraged blood flow, and cleared the mind. You've heard of a woman in the next village who rubs her scalp with goose fat and powdered fennel every morning. Her hair is luminous. She also talks to frogs. The two facts may or may not be related. Herbs, you're starting to realize, are only part of the picture. The other part is deeply psychological. You're not just cleaning yourself, you're protecting yourself from illness, from madness, from the ever-present threat of bad smells. Hair that stinks could be mistaken for hair cursed. And cursed hair? That's a conversation with the village priest you'd rather avoid. You hear someone muttering behind you and turn to see old Rena, a widow and reputed wise woman, waving something that looks like burnt wood in your direction. She's performing a cleansing rite, she says, chasing off scalp demons. You politely nod, because arguing with Rena never ends well. Especially after dusk, she presses a smudgy pouch into your hand. For the oil, she says. Inside, powdered lavender, dried mint, and what might be a beetle leg. Still, you thank her. Smelling like a spice cupboard is a small price to pay for peace. There's something oddly soothing about these routines. The boiling of herbs, the brushing out of twigs. Even if the water isn't hot and the soap is non-existent, it feels like self-care. You're reclaiming control in a world where control is rare. Now, let's not forget the oddballs. Some fringe recipes suggest massaging in stale ale mixed with ashes and letting it sit until the demons of itch depart. Others speak of snail slime or mashed radish applied to the crown of the head to invite growth. None of these sound appealing, but they are documented, sort of. The line between medicine, magic, and outright guesswork in medieval times is thin and wobbly. One particular account describes using poppy syrup mixed with honey to tame unruly hair. The result was probably a sticky helmet of beeswax sweet curls. Did it work? Hard to say. But people swore by it. And in a time when mirrors are rare and vanity is a sin, that kind of confidence is half the battle. You sit by the fire as evening falls, hair still damp from the rosemary rinse. Someone is roasting onions in the hearth, and the smell blends oddly well with your herbal scalp cocktail. A child points at you and laughs. Your hair's gone fluffy like a haystack. But the itch is gone, and your head smells like a salad again, so progress. You pull your cloak tighter and glance around the room. Everyone here has their own trick. Some use raw egg, others swear by soapwort root, boiled into a frothy mess that vaguely resembles shampoo. It's called soapwort for a reason. The saponins in the plant actually create lather, real lather. Historians do agree on this one. Soapwort was genuinely used as a cleanser for both hair and fabric. You make a mental note to steal some from the Abbey garden next time you pass. And here's a fun one. Some women believed singing while washing hair improved results, not just because it passed the time, but because sound Like scent, had power. Lullabies to the follicles, ballads for the bangs. Eventually, you settle down on your straw mat again, scalp tingling gently, faintly spicy aroma wafting around your head. Not bad for someone with no plumbing, no shampoo, and a neighbor who thinks goats can bless your scalp. Tomorrow, maybe you'll try soapwort, or maybe goose fat, or maybe you'll just roll with the haystack look and declare it fashionable. You wake to the rhythmic toll of bells. It's not a dream. It's the abbey nearby, calling the monks to prayer. Again. You stretch under your rough woolen blanket, and as you do, the faint scent of yesterday's rosemary rinse drifts from your hair. You decide it's time for a change of scenery, a visit to the abbey. Not for spiritual enlightenment necessarily, more for a peek into what monks, those tonsured scalp bearers, know about keeping their heads clean. You pass the wooden gates just as a young novice opens them with a grunt. His haircut is that classic monk look, bald on top with a crown of hair around the sides, the original medieval halo. It's both a spiritual symbol and, in practical terms, an excellent place to test out experimental shampoos. Monks live predictably. That's their thing. Prayers, work, more prayers, maybe a little wine if it's a feast day. And in between all that, brewing, gardening, and yes, making things like herbal tonics, potions, and occasionally hair rinses. It's not because they're vain. It's because the rule of Saint Benedict said they should be clean and orderly, especially for communal living. So when you peer into the kitchen and see a monk stirring a pot that smells like burnt daisies and old apples, you don't ask too many questions. You just nod approvingly and try not to breathe too deeply. That particular mixture, likely one of their many concoctions involving ash soap, wood ash, animal fat, maybe a few handfuls of crushed lavender or marigold if they were feeling fancy. Monasteries were among the few places that could reliably make soap. And when soap existed, it usually stung. You sit with Brother Ulrich, an elderly monk with a crinkled forehead and the look of a man who's seen too many herbal disasters. He tells you about the simple wash, a brew of chamomile tea and sheep's milk, massaged into the hair with a linen cloth, then gently rinsed with cool spring water. You raise an eyebrow. Sheep's milk? He shrugs. Soothes the scalp mostly. Tastes terrible though. That's another point about monasteries. They had access to things peasants didn't, like thyme, and beeswax, and imported oils, if they were rich. While the average field worker was scrubbing with clay and river silt, monks were experimenting with almond oil infusions and rosewater tinctures. Granted, it wasn't always successful. One poorly aged manuscript describes a head rinse involving the broth of boiled mouse bones, but scholars suspect that was a medical remedy rather than a conditioner. At least, we hope. Historians still argue whether the cloistered life really improved hygiene overall. On one hand, monks bathed more often than villagers. On the other, group bathing plus shared bedding plus limited airflow equals a fungal festival. Clean hair, yes. Ringworm? Also yes. Still, there's no denying they got creative. You stroll past a herbarium where a young monk is grinding soapwort root into a foam. Real suds. He lets you touch the lather. It's thick and creamy, like the kind you've only dreamed of. It smells like wet spinach. But at this point, you'd take that over vinegar any day. There's another monk drying bundles of horsetail plant, used for centuries to strengthen hair and bones. He dips it in rainwater and swishes it over his own tonsure with the casual air of a man who has truly accepted the weirdness of his life. For shine, he says, smiling, and the ladies love it. Then he remembers he's a monk and blushes fiercely. The library holds some of the strangest tidbits. One worn scroll speaks of cleansing the head with wine mixed with the dust of marble and crushed lilies. Whether this was an early attempt at scalp exfoliation or simply the recipe for a mild concussion is unclear, and you notice something else in the abbey. Silence. The kind of silence that lets you focus on texture, smell, the feel of water trickling through hair. Without constant noise, washing your hair here becomes a ritual, almost a meditation. You begin to understand why some people believed cleanliness, especially of the head, brought you closer to God. Maybe it was the clarity it gave. Maybe it was just the relief of not scratching all the time. Either way, it stuck. By the time you leave the abbey, your head is filled with strange recipes and even stranger smells. You've got a scrap of parchment with a monk's favorite blend. Warm goat's milk, crushed sage, and just a touch of lemon peel for the well-traveled monk. Your scalp is buzzing in anticipation, or possibly from the experimental tea you drank in the scriptorium. As you trudge home, you pass a few other folk who raise their eyebrows at your unusually fragrant aura. One woman asks if you've been anointed. You assure her it's just Brother Arik's chamomile sheep milk shampoo. She nods solemnly. May the saints bless your follicles. Back at your hut, you try recreating the monkish wash. The milk is lukewarm. The herbs are fresh. You dip the cloth in, squeeze it out, and begin patting your scalp like it's the most precious thing you own. Because in medieval times, a non-itchy scalp is a form of wealth. You lie back, satisfied. Your hair might not sparkle, but it doesn't stick together anymore. It's soft, smells faintly of meadow, and hasn't set off any neighborhood dogs. Success. Tomorrow perhaps you'll try their crushed lily rinse, or maybe that mint vinegar blend with holy salt sprinkled in. Either way, you're starting to feel like a medieval shampoo connoisseur. You're awakened by shouting. Not an emergency, just your neighbor trying to convince his goose to get out of the water barrel. Again. As you roll out of your scratchy blanket and rub the sleep from your eyes, you realize something's different. Your hair doesn't feel like it's plotting against you. It's soft, manageable, smells faintly of chamomile and maybe goat. But today, you're feeling bold, adventurous, curious about what the fancy people do. You know, those who don't share a comb with the local miller and haven't used yesterday's soup as a hair rinse. So you head toward the manor house, not in it, because you're very much not allowed, but near enough to get a glimpse into how nobles handle their hair. Unlike the monks, the noble class didn't necessarily wash more often, but when they did, oh, it was an event. You slip past the outer wall and peek into the solar, the private chamber where a noble woman lounges near her fire. Her hair is being brushed by a servant, stroke after stroke, as if the strands are spun gold. They might as well be. The amount of time and labor going into this is worth more than your entire year's barley harvest. Her shampoo? Probably something you've never tasted, like Castile soap, made from imported olive oil and lye, perfumed with orange blossoms or cloves. Nobles had access to luxuries you didn't even know existed. Imported oils from the Mediterranean, resin-based conditioners, even early versions of pomades made from beeswax, rosewater, and lanolin. You spot a glazed bowl beside her. It's filled with something thick and golden. Honey, not for eating, for hair, mixed with egg yolks, sometimes even lemon juice. This mixture, beaten to a froth and warmed over coals, is carefully applied and then, get this, left to sit for hours, wrapped in linen. That's right. Medieval nobles did deep conditioning masks centuries before you did. Still, it wasn't all roses. The sheer volume of hair some of these noble women had meant washing. It was a full-day ordeal. You didn't just hop into the tub, which had to be filled by servants, heated with firewood, scented with herbs. You soaked, then rinsed, then sat while your hair was detangled with ivory combs or silver picks. And then, if you were lucky, it dried by the hearth while someone recited poetry about how beautiful your forehead was. Historians still argue whether these elaborate routines were common or reserved for ceremonial occasions. Some believe hair washing was monthly at most. Any more frequent, and you risked weakening the humors. Others suggest noble women washed more often, but kept it secret, lest they be accused of vanity. Because, you know, hygiene was suspicious if you enjoyed it. You wander around to the back, where a chambermaid is wringing out a cloth soaked in what smells like rosewater and goat tallow. She tells you about her lady's newest obsession: crushed pearl powder mixed with violet syrup. For shine, apparently. She rolls her eyes. She says it makes her glow. I say it makes her smell like a bakery. You like her instantly. And of course, no noble hair care routine would be complete without perfume. Hair was often anointed with oils steeped in jasmine, lily, or even ambergris, a waxy substance produced by whales and prized for its long-lasting fragrance. Yes, you heard right. Whale goo. In your hair. Very posh. Then there's fashion. You recall seeing noble women with impossibly high braided towers, pinned in place with silver needles and threaded with ribbons. Cleanliness was a visual illusion. If your hair looked good and smelled expensive, who cared what lived inside it? Lice were a noble problem too. They just had better accessories for hiding them. You pass by a tapestry showing a woman having her hair braided by 3 maids, each holding a different scented oil. One bottle has a label you can't read, but you can smell the cloves from here. It smells oddly festive. Like a medieval Christmas cookie, the men weren't left out either. Noblemen often wore their hair long and curled, using heated metal rods to achieve the effect. Imagine a medieval curling iron, heated in a fire, then applied cautiously, unless you enjoyed the smell of burning hair. Their washes were simpler, mostly vinegar rinses, maybe mixed with wine or herbs. But their beards, oh, those were pampered, combed, waxed, perfumed. You once heard of a duke who allegedly used a rinse made from melted snow, rosemary, and powdered emerald. For shine. And presumably for bragging rights. Then there's this. Noble women sometimes avoided washing hair altogether by dusting it with perfumed powders. Think early dry shampoo, but with rice flour, ground iris root, or even chalk. It kept hair looking fresh, absorbed oil, and let you stretch your hairstyle for a few more days or weeks. You know, in case the tub was occupied or your bath servant was on strike. You take all this in with a mixture of awe and mild horror. The lengths these people go to for their hair are impressive, but also exhausting. You pass a servant carting out a bowl of what looks like mashed pears and cream. For a moment, you hope it's dessert. Then you hear him mutter something about split ends, and your appetite disappears. As you leave the manor grounds, you feel conflicted. On one hand, their hair probably smells better. On the other, no one should spend 5 hours detangling something just so it can be wrapped in a silk bonnet and ignored for another week. Back in your village, you notice the difference immediately. The smells, the simplicity, the pace. Here, people may not have perfumed pearl rinses, but they also don't risk catching their braid in a chandelier. You scratch your scalp gently, still soft from the monk's recipe. A noble woman might scoff at your lack of shine, but you're not sure you'd trade comfort for cloves. Still, a little powdered iris root might be worth a try, if only because you're curious what noble scalp smells like. You're back in the village now, but something feels different. There's a dampness in the air, a stillness that clings to the skin, and people are whispering, lower, tighter, as if sound itself might carry disease. The year is later now, decades later. You've aged without noticing. You still have hair, miraculously, but everyone's worried about other things these days. Welcome to the age of plagues, when life turns grim and death seems to waft in on the very wind. Hygiene gets redefined. The idea of pouring water on your head, especially warm water, feels risky. People believe heat opens the pores and lets sickness in. So you, like everyone else, begin to skip the rinses. Instead, you reach for powders. Anything dry, anything scented, anything that can give the illusion of clean. Dry shampoo, medieval edition, is surprisingly creative. You start with flour. Simple, accessible, absorbent. Dust it into your hair. Wait a bit, brush it out. The flour takes the grease with it, sort of. But it also leaves you smelling like yesterday's bread dough. Not ideal. Then someone suggests ground orris root, the dried rhizome of a type of iris. You get your hands on some from a traveling merchant who also sells wooden teeth and snake oil. It's sweet, earthy, a little peppery, and much more pleasant than flour. Now you smell like a distant cousin of a noble. Progress. As conditions worsen, people begin leaning hard into perfume. Not because it helps, but because it masks. Underarm stench, scalp stink, lice nests. Drown them all in rose water, lavender oil, or crushed rosemary wrapped in muslin and tied like a tiny pillow to your braid. You're told to avoid combing your hair too vigorously. It might stir the humors. Better to pat it, or dab it with cloth soaked in wine, if you can spare it. And yes, people really did this. Wine was believed to purify. The logic, if it's good enough to kill worms in the belly, maybe it can kill something on the scalp too. But there's a darker layer under all this. Lice and fleas are rampant. Everyone has them, even the rich. You've tried the vinegar rinses and the rosemary decoctions, but it's hard to keep them at bay when everyone sleeps 5 to a bed and hasn't bathed in a month. So you give in to the local remedy, crushed fern seed mixed with hog lard, applied behind the ears. It's greasy, smelly, and makes your pillow disgusting. But hey, the scratching slows. That's a win. Historians still argue whether these powders and perfume patches were effective or just elaborate coping mechanisms in the face of zero options. Some claim the constant dusting and combing prevented infestations. Others think it only delayed the inevitable. But you cling to it anyway. Anything to feel like you're doing something. At market, vendors now sell sachets of ground clove, mint, and dried orange peel for healthful hair vapors. You buy one and tie it into your cap. It's like walking around with a medieval potpourri bag on your head. A child tugs your sleeve and tells you your hair smells like boiled cake. You beam. There's also this one odd remedy, a mix of soot, rose ash, and powdered bark, rubbed directly into the scalp. The idea is that darkening the hair disguises oiliness, while the gritty texture absorbs excess moisture. You try it once. Your scalp feels like sandpaper for a week. Never again. The weirdest one? Crushed dried frogs. Yes, frogs, mixed with lye ash and used in extreme cases of scalp heat. You never go that far. You have standards. One day, you overhear a passing traveler from the city talking about a barber surgeon who claims hair never needs washing if it's powdered daily and combed with a silver pick. Silver, he says, kills the corruption. You wonder if he just wants to sell silver picks. Still, the idea sticks with you. You notice hairstyles changing. Hairs being hidden more, coiled tight, braided into buns, and covered with linen veils or caps. Out of sight, out of scrutiny. Head coverings help keep the powder in place and maybe the lice out. Maybe. You still miss water sometimes. Real rinsing. The way cool stream water ran over your scalp that day with the nettles. But that was before everyone feared that water might carry plague. Instead, you keep a pouch of dried lavender by your bed. You sprinkle it into your hair at night and pretend the rustle of dry petals is the sound of a clean stream. You close your eyes and remember the monk's chamomile wash, the noblewoman's honey mask, the vinegar sharpness in the morning air. Your hair isn't clean, not really, but it smells fine. It looks fine. You're not scratching. You're surviving, and maybe, in this strange, dusty chapter of history, That's the best shampoo of all. And now, as the fire in your hearth softens to glowing embers and the last distant bell toll fades into quiet, you let your thoughts drift like wood smoke. The sounds of the village, once sharp, once insistent, have settled into something hushed and steady, a lullaby written in rustling thatch and creaking timber. Your scalp feels warm beneath your linen coif, the scent of lavender clinging to your hair like the memory of summer. Whether it was vinegar or nettles, beer or honey, monks or noble women, it all blends together now, softened by the passage of time. The odd powders, the whispered spells, the scratchy combs carved from bone, they no longer seem strange. Just part of the rhythm of a world doing its best. You breathe in slowly. There's no rush. Your thoughts wander, lazy and unhurried, back through the fields, the abbey gardens, the manor's silk-draped chambers. Each one fades like a lantern extinguished gently with the fingertips. You imagine your hair swaying slightly as you lie back, heavy, fragrant, and unbothered. No more rinses tonight. No goose fat, or rosemary, or powdered roots. Just stillness. Just the settling of dust on stone floors and the comfort of a long-forgotten routine. There is something quietly reassuring about it all. Even in an age of superstition and soot, people still reached for clean, for comfort, for care. And you? You did too. Let your head sink into your pillow now. Let the past curl around you like the scent of chamomile steam. No lice, no plagues, just rest. You've made it through another long day in medieval life, and now it's time to sleep.